Cops of Reddit, what was the funniest thing you've seen someone do because they noticed you? I was at a traffic light waiting to cross, and I saw this lady with her young son across the street. The kid was running around yelling and generally not listening to his mom. As I crossed the street, I heard the mother say, "If you don't behave, I'll ask the police, uncle." Uncle, lady, I'm like 23, to catch you. Look, he's here already. Kid stops dead in his tracks, looks at me, wordlessly bursts into tears and starts hugging his mother's leg. Mother gives me an apologetic smile and I'm trying not to giggle as I walk on. Story 2. My dad and I both work for the same PD. This is his story, not mine. The shift before he had a guy detained for misdemeanor warrants or something. Some junkie comes walking down the road, sees the flashing lights and a cop next to an open back door. He empties his pockets, dumping a pipe, needles, and 5 grams of ice on the hood of his patrol car. He then spreads his legs and puts his hands on the car. My dad was shocked, let the other guy in the back go, and took in the guy who just handed over his drugs. Apparently not sleeping for 3 days makes you paranoid. Story 3. Maybe too late, but one day I was heading to my station at the end of the shift, meaning I stare straight ahead and avoid getting any paperwork to make me stay late. I happened to be behind the same car for maybe 2 miles on the same road. We're sitting at a red light and out of nowhere this dude runs it. Everyone at the intersection looks at me, so of course I stop the dude, make contact, and he can barely hand me his license. He's shaking so bad from being nervous. I ask him why he's so scared, and he says he saw me behind him and he's on diversion for running a red light. Also ends up having weed in the car. Story 4. Where I work, it's illegal to walk around in public with open liquor. At the time, I was on patrol and driving a Crown Vic. As I was going down the street, a guy must have thought I was a taxi cab and he tried hailing me with an open can of beer. Once he realized I was a police officer, he looked just like Ralphie from A Christmas Story. Oh, fudge. I was laughing so hard I didn't even have the heart to give him a ticket. Story 5. Not a cop, but when I was much younger, I was driving a 1994 Saturn SL1 that wasn't much of a car. No power, exhaust leaks, but it got me around. I pulled up next to a cruiser with a younger guy driving, and decided that for some reason I wanted to see what he would do. As we waited at the light, I revved the engine multiple times. He looks over at me with his sunglasses on, no smile, just stared. I returned his look. When the light turned green, I punched the gas, and the car promptly took off at its max speed of 2.5 miles an hour. I looked over and he was now laughing. Then he punched the gas and blew me away. I kind of hope I gave him a laugh in an otherwise boring, dangerous day. Hey, it must have been a relief for this guy. He's like, I don't want to chase down some speeder on the road. Don't make me race you, man. And then you do that. Breaks the tension real quick. I would say you probably did lighten up his day, OP. Story 6. I was sitting at a red light once and this car in the next lane went through the light, stopped right in the middle of the intersection, then put it in reverse and backed up behind the line. It was late and there weren't any other cars around, so I was thinking, dude, just go. You already ran the light. Pretty sure if a cop was around to see that, they wouldn't just not give you a ticket because you backed up. Also glad they were in the next lane over, because it wasn't like the light had just turned red, so they clearly hadn't been paying attention. They probably would have plowed right into me if they'd been in the same lane. Story 7. I'm not an officer, but one lovely summer day in downtown Seattle, my children and me were wandering around at Pike Place Market, riding the monorail, etc. They were roughly 4 and 5 at the time. A street artist had made my daughter a balloon crown with a big flower poking out of the top. She was wearing it on her head when we passed by an alley and it blew off into the street. It exploded, piece by piece, with each piece echoing down the street like a gunshot. 2 street officers and 2 mounted officers on horses were there in the blink of an eye. They saw the balloon parts, realized what had happened, and my daughter was crying. The officers were shaken but laughing, and this, being Seattle, latte land, prompted one officer to say that we owed them all a coffee. My daughter was sad to lose her hat, but the mounted officers let my children pet the horses, so everything worked out fine. Story 8. In an opposite way, my dad once woke me up at like 10 p.m. for a surprise trip to a fast food place. It was a sort of weird tradition we had growing up. I told him I couldn't go because I was in pajamas, and he said it was fine as long as no cops were there, because, you know, it's illegal to wear pajamas in public or I would be arrested. Of course, we show up and who's sitting in the back corner of the restaurant? That's right, 2 cops. My little 5-year-old self nearly lost it. My dad thought it was hilarious. Story 9. I frequent a tavern in my city. A cop stops by every now and then for dinner to go and chills in his squad car for a couple minutes waiting for staff to walk the food out since he doesn't want to make other patrons nervous. I was out smoking and there he is, patiently waiting out back. Another patron walks out, stops dead in his tracks when he sees the idling cop car, stares for a few seconds, spins around and walks back inside. Had me dying for a minute. What is it about cop cars that make you so nervous? Like, me too. But I don't get it. I don't have any warrants out for me as far as I know. And my record's pretty clean, so why? Why whenever I'm driving and a cop car pulls up, I instantly start going 5 below the speed limit? Story 10. One time we had a shirtless man enter the lobby of the jail yelling he was a DEA agent. He was demanding that we release 2 inmates to him, his girlfriend and friend. After he was in cuffs, it turned out the 2 people he was after had already been released the day before. When we ran his name, he had a felony warrant for impersonating a peace officer. Story 11. Not a cop, but a pretty funny thing happened when my husband and I took a road trip a few years ago. It was night, getting close to our destination when we got pulled over. We weren't speeding or anything. Cop comes to the window and says, "Hey, the light for your back license plate is out." Obviously, we had no idea about this and equally confused why we got pulled over for this. Husband asks, "Really? Can I get out to go check?" Cop kinda stammers, "Okay." He gets out, goes to the back of the car, and punches the plate, and the light turned back on. Cop laughs his butt off, tells him to get it checked out, and we were on our way. No ticket. Story 12. This will probably get buried here, but whatever. My dad and I are going home from somewhere when some idiot in front of us brakes really hard, forcing my dad to do the same, while both are on the second lane. Understandably, my dad honks at him. After the roundabout, the dude pulls up next to us. "The hell did you honk at me for?" "The hell did you brake like that for?" "Didn't you see the police car patrolling on the first lane, you cretin?" "So?" "Go back inside your mom's private parts." It's an Eastern European insult. So yeah, the nincompoop thought you couldn't pass a police car on patrol? Wonder if that made him cause an accident yet. Hope not. Story 13. Walked up on a woman shooting H into her leg. The look she gave me was kind of an oh crap, but calm about it look. I just asked her to pack up her things and to leave. I felt more sorry for her than anything, and just tried to be nice, as I imagine most people aren't nice to her in the city I was working in. She showed me her university ID, and it seemed that one thing led to another, and she went from being a university student to sitting on a sidewalk shooting H in the space of a year. I hope she's doing okay. Story 14. Not a cop, but I once saw a show where police were everywhere looking for a guy who'd run for it. Anyway, 2 cops are cruising down the street, and as they pass this man, they think he looks familiar, so start slowing down. They call out to him, and instantly the guy bolted. So they chased him down, and while they're arresting him, he's screaming, "They've got the wrong man, and he's allergic to handcuffs." Anyway, turns out he was the wrong guy, and was allergic to metal. He's just terrified of police. Story 15. Not a cop, but I was going 90 on a back road just trying to get home. Suddenly a cop pulled up to a stoplight I was flying past. I had a joint in the car, so I started to pull over before he hit his lights and threw a pencil out the window to distract the cop. He found the pencil rather quickly and came over to ask me why I threw it. I had just gotten done eating the joint and I didn't have any water, so when I tried to speak I coughed and a piece of weed came out. He ran my crap, gave me a ticket for going 15 over, and he was nice since I pulled over, but he gave me a summons for possession still. Story 16. I'm not a cop, but I have a story of getting away kinda. When I was a teenager, I had my license at 16. My homeboy and his brother-in-law at the time got high as crap, we smoked all the time, and called me asking to take brother-in-law home. I'd just gotten back from work and swapped into PJ pants. It's like 6 p.m. Well, I take my homie and his bro to dude's house and he says, "I'll be like 10 minutes. Come back and get me." So we go like 3 blocks down the street to a ballpark parking lot to park and chill. We smoke a bowl and 5-0 comes down the driveway. Only one way out, so we had nowhere to go. My homie puts pipe between his feet and pulls out some smokes. I very rarely smoke, but to hide the smell, which I doubt worked, we both lit up. Cop rolls up behind. "License and registration, please." And I forgot my wallet in my work pants. Well, screw me, right? Well, I give him names and numbers, blah, blah, blah. He clears me, as I blow cig smoke right into his face, not even thinking. I look at him as soon as I did it, and he looked me dead in the eyes. I said sorry immediately, explained the situation. He asked me and my homie to get out of the car and made us swap seats because he had his ID. And he made him drive home. Bro stayed at home, and me and homie left. No ticket, nothing, just told us to leave. Second luckiest I've ever been with the 5-0. Now I don't screw around and wait till I'm home. I think about that dude all the time. Glad he didn't screw me. With tickets, I mean, you weirdos. Story 17. This may not fit, but it is so funny, so I'm gonna add it. A kid that I went to school with had a family member that worked for the sheriff's department, and I was at a church dinner when he told us this story. Whenever he was at the end of his shift, he would tell people that if they could give a reason for committing the crime he had never heard, he would let them go. He was avoiding work and he was like 50, so he had heard and seen everything. He had a few that were strange, but the best one was a guy that was pulling a big trailer in the pouring rain going like 80 on some blacktop. He told the guy this, and the guy said something like, "I just wanted to see if you'd get off your butt in the pouring rain and write me a ticket." And he told the guy, "You're free to go if you slow down to 65. The guy said, "Yes, sir," and pulled away. Story 18. Not a cop. As I merged onto the interstate one morning, I noticed there was only one other car sharing the road with me. I knew there was a spot about a mile away where local police sat in the median to watch for speeders. The car just ahead of me and one lane over had out-of-state plates. I decided to watch their brake lights to see if they tapped the brakes when they saw the police and to see how close they got before they noticed. We weren't speeding at all. As we got pretty close, I was impressed that they had resisted the urge to tap the brakes, because I figured they'd seen the patrol car by this time. About that time, they must have spotted the officer because they slammed on the brakes. Almost came to a complete stop in the center lane of the interstate. Good thing we were the only cars in sight. They got pulled over. Story 19. Not a policeman, but served a role in the department that included wearing police dress. On the way to a function, a friend and I were walking in our uniforms. Ahead of us, there was a group of businessmen trying to jimmy their way into a car that they'd locked themselves out of. It was the middle of the CBD area, and it was reasonably obvious that they weren't stealing it. But the best bit was them trying to act nonchalant when they saw us coming. Standing around looking innocent, wearing full business suits, clothes hangers unraveled in their hands. Absolutely nothing to see here, officer. The thing is, we had zero power in terms of law enforcement, so it was honestly easier for us to pretend to not see them either. Story 20. I got a story. I was with a group of friends, and we did this because we saw a cop. This happened on a road trip to DC. One of these friends, Mark, is black, and it was an ongoing joke between us that he gets treated worse by society because of being black. So we were crossing a street with a median to get to a convenience store. As we start across, we see a cop car pull up to the store and the officer get out. So all of us tell our Mark to quickly hide in the bush in the median, and without missing a beat, he does. Now, of course, he does so in the most obvious fake way of actually trying to hide, like the dramatically overblown sneaking and the popping his head up from behind the bush and everything. Well, the cop actually took notice of us and stopped on the sidewalk. We finished crossing the street and he's like, "Why did you hide like that?" At which point we bust out laughing. We just said it was a joke about him being black and the cop just shrugged it off. Story 21. Cop here. Seen lots of funny things in my last few years. People walking into light poles looking at us, people slipping and falling, etc. But my favorite happened before I became a full-time officer. I was patrolling a big festival with the local police on the marine patrol boats. This party is a massive crap show where everyone parks their boats in two lines, everyone hops out and drinks and parties in the water, all to upset a big exclusive millionaires club that owns the beach. As long as they don't touch the shoreline, they can't be charged with anything. Now, the police presence is mostly to deter people driving their boats while impaired. We normally have a pretty sizable group to attend this event. So here I am with my leg up on the front of the boat like Jack Sparrow, cruising behind the boats to make sure no one is face down in the water drowning. Fun fact, it's also a Mardi Gras style party where women compete for beads to win a prize. Well, I obviously have no beads. But every time an attractive young woman saw me, they would flash me their tiggle bitties. I saw just about every shape, size, and color that day. Story 22. A number of years back, I lived in a house that had a curve on each corner and I was in the middle. One day I was sitting out front and noticed a policeman parked directly across from my house. We had been having a problem with speeders in the neighborhood, and this cop was recording cars with a radar gun. He caught a few, but the funniest one was a minivan with a family inside. As he came around the first curve, it was obvious he saw the cop and the speed gun because we saw the brake lights flicker and he, the driver, began scrambling for his seatbelt. I started laughing as the cop started around his car to go after him, and he gave me a thumbs up. It was hilarious. What was this man doing speeding without a seatbelt on with his family in the car? Set a good example for your children, sir. Story 23. Even some of the simplest things were hilarious. I was about 3 blocks from the bar area of town on New Year's Eve. Now, keep in mind, it was freaking cold. Nose hairs, freeze. Instantly have to pee when walking outside, cold. This guy was walking with a thin silk shirt, dress slacks, slip-on shoes with no socks, and he was as bald as could be with no hat. Stumbling is more what he was doing, actually. I stop him and offer him a ride. It's policy to run everyone who gets in your car and then pat down before sitting them back there. As I'm running him for warrants, he pulls out a cheeseburger from his pocket. It had no wrapper. I asked him to keep his hands out of his pockets, but he was too trashed. He sat the burger on my hood and I did a Terry frisk for weapons. He had nothing, except for something in his other pocket, hard and brick-like. I was confident it wasn't a brick and he was being cool, so I asked him to retrieve it because he couldn't remember what it was. He reached in his pocket, had a shocked look on his face, and slowly retrieved an unwrapped Rice Krispie treat. I was confused, but he slowly brought it to his mouth and tried to take a bite. It was so cold, his teeth touching it sounded like that scene from American History 10 when the actor's teeth touched the curb. It was like he was in trouble. Hell, it could have been an edible, but I didn't give a crap. He was so scared and trashed, smelled heavily of alcohol, he thought he was in trouble. Anyway, as cold as it was, and him not shivering, I had an ambulance come by, and I think he later got the silver bullet enema. Story 24. When I was in my first year or two on the job, I was in a fully marked patrol car waiting in traffic at a red light. To my right and slightly to my rear in the right lane was another car with 2 young guys in it. They were having a great time flipping me off, taking long swigs of beer, and basically acting the fool because they knew I couldn't see them from that angle. Little did they know that my coworker was sitting right behind me in an unmarked green Dodge St. Regis. He called me on the car-to-car frequency and told me what was going on. As soon as the light turned green and we got moving, he pulled up behind them and hit the lights. They couldn't believe it, and they got especially mad when I rolled up, and my buddy asked me if he should give them a break. I asked him to tell me again what sort of gestures they were doing at my expense. Sorry, nope. Story 25. Not a cop, but totally relevant and funny. I was with my wife and my 13-ish-year-old son. We needed to stop briefly at a tobacco shop. 18 plus only allowed. There was an off-duty cop still in uniform at the counter talking to the cashier. My son stopped with the door open and said, "I can't go in there. There's a cop in there." The cop said, "What? There's no cops in here," and promptly yanks off his uniform shirt to be in just a wife beater. I'm still laughing 13 years later. Story 26. My neighbor is a cop. This is his story as he told us a couple days ago. Night patrol. 2 guys in the car, cruising around a popular hangout spot for college kids. There's a medium-sized river and a cool rope bridge across. Kids from a nearby local college tend to hang out drinking. Drinking in public places is a criminal offense in my part of the world. So neighbor and partner driving around, spots a bunch of guys on the rope bridge. Business as usual. The kid posted his lookout yells a warning, and the rest leap in action. Before the cops are out of the car, a couple of plastic bags go overboard. Cops know that they just ditched the alcohol and whatever substance they may have been smoking. Anyway, gets out, talks to the alpha who claims they were just hanging out. Suddenly, one of the kids lets out a blood-curdling shriek and plunges into the river. For a moment, the watchers can only gape. Then the alpha takes one look around and says, "Crap, the film!" and makes as if to jump in too, along with the rest of the pack. One cop stops them while the other goes to get the kid who jumped in. The alpha explains rather incoherently. They're doing film studies and had to make a short film as a group project. They were celebrating the completion of the film, which was stored in a pen drive. Unfortunately, they had the pen drive out when the alarm sounded, and in the haste to dump the evidence, the pen drive went in the bag with the bottles. The kid who jumped in was the first to have the light bulb moment that they just trashed a semester's work. The cops fight to hold back a chuckle. The jumper had been hauled out at this point, and joined the kids to search for the bags. After a quarter of an hour, they finally spot the bag lodged among some rocks and get it out. Fortunately, the bag had been tied shut tightly enough to be waterproof, so the film is safe. By now, the kids are so relieved that they forgot the evidence has been recovered too. The cops decide to be generous and don't file charges. Just confiscate what's left of the alcohol and call the kids' parents to fetch them. Story 27. I wasn't the cop, but one time I was at a house party. Almost everyone was underage and either drinking or high. Most of the partying was in the backyard, with people going inside to get high or use the bathroom. I went to go use the bathroom, and the next thing I know, the music in the living room and outside went quiet. I walk out the bathroom and see like 2 people leaving through the front door. I make my way to the back door and open it to see a police officer talking to the owner of the house, and the backyard is empty. I don't know what the cop saw when he got there, but he had to have seen kids scattering. The yard was full earlier, and there were like 4 beer pong tables. And if that wasn't enough, he just watched me open the door and then quietly tried to close it as if he hadn't seen me. Story 28. Does one from the private security world count? Part of my job is driving people to medical facilities for drug testing, primarily either random or after a non-injury worksite accident. Occasionally, I have to observe the tests, which is by far the most awkward crap I've ever dealt with in life. Well, this chick wrecked a forklift. She's early to mid-20s and honestly seems baked out of her mind. We're almost out of the parking lot when she says she needs to go back inside to get something. Generally, if it's something important like medical or prescription paperwork, either I'll go get it or the person's supervisor will bring it out. I ask what it is and she straight up says, "My fake pee." I did the most honorable thing I could. I didn't immediately report it, but I didn't let her get it either. I spent half an hour in a car with this girl screaming at me that I was ruining her life, begging me to take her to XYZ friend's place so they can pee in a bottle for her. Offers of drugs, favors, yeah, you name it. We get to the facility, she tests and, wow, fails. Makes sense. As I asked her the last time she smoked, she said, "In my car before I clocked in." Well, she's honest. Gotta give her that. Honest in the upfront sense, at least. Story 29. Not a cop, but I work in a gas station, so I meet lots of them. One of my favorite ones is probably the most well-known cop, not counting sheriffs or state troopers. He's a bike cop when the weather is nice, and he patrols downtown by our local college. People like to put dish soap in the Main Street fountain in downtown and flood the street with bubbles. He caught a couple of guys doing that as it was starting to run over. They freaked and tried to run, but they slipped and were struggling to get back up. It was a weekend and they were drunk as hell. He also told me one time he was riding riding his bike, and someone that's pretty well known by cops saw him and tried to run, but hit a light pole. Cops said he wouldn't have noticed him if he didn't make a scene. Story 30. Our county fair was in season, and usually most of the deputies are there for the demolition derby. They can usually get out of hand, and people begin to fight over regulations and technicality wins. I was walking through the crowd, making rounds, so to speak. I walked near 2 parked vehicles, and this guy's about to go pee between them. I happen to walk by as the guy's starting. He's facing in my direction, away from the derby pit. He notices me, shoves his chicken back inside of his pants, peeing himself in the process. I told him to go to the restrooms next time and walked away. Story 31. Not a cop, but work with them. Last week in court, a girl got released on bond and called her boyfriend to bring her some street clothes. He came rushing in with a wad of clothes, obviously for her to put on, and as he was waiting in the hall, started folding them. As he did, he dropped a small baggie of a white, crystalline substance. He didn't notice right away, but the sheriff, 2 deputies, chief of police, and 2 state troopers also waiting in the hall sure did. They almost couldn't stop laughing long enough to arrest him. She got out, he went in. Story 32. Downtown weekend duty dealing with the drunks on the street after last call. Halloween night, there's a guy dressed as SpongeBob, huge foam costume, the works. He is drunk as a skunk, stumbling across the street with a pitcher of beer. My partner pulls over, we hop out and grab the guy, pop open the back door, and my partner begins stuffing him in full costume into the back of the cruiser singing, "You lived in a pineapple under the sea. You're drinking in public and coming with me." Didn't miss a beat. I died laughing. Story 33. My wife and I went to Jamaica last year for our 1-year anniversary. We ended up taking a short 10-minute flight to the resort instead of the 2-hour bus ride. So that means going through security again to get on the plane. My wife brought her Clarisonic, which is pretty much a vibrating face brush. Well, the security in Jamaica opened my wife's bag and pulled the thing out of her bag. It's in a case that makes it look almost like a fake dong. So they take one look at it and start questioning my wife about what it is. She gets a red face and starts pantomiming, washing her face and trying to explain what it is. I'm not sure they believed her. Story 34. Haven't been a cop long enough to have a long list, but I'll bite. Funniest thing I've seen so far is a naked guy on a lot of drugs rolling back and forth in a garden shed with the door ajar, shouting and yelping. I couldn't stop myself from laughing. I mean, obviously, it's sad. The guy needs help. But the whole scene was absurd. It was just silly is all. At least he had the decency to get dressed before we had to go in there and wrestle him out. You know he's gonna be slippery. I still try to be funny when I can as well. A few days ago, I saw a group of kids loitering in front of the fire department, then again in front of the post office later that day. It was obvious to me what they were doing, so I rolled up on them as I rolled down my window, sticking my head out. Team Red? Some hot garbage like Blue or Hufflepuff came out of one kid's mouth. Then another kid raised his hand and sheepishly said, "I'm Team Red." I put on my best disgruntled detective voice, threw up the horns and said, "We're gonna own this city, kid." As I drove off, I could see them doubled over, laughing through my rearview mirror. Better red than dead, though. Story 35. Not a cop, but I'm an intern for the state's attorney, so I read a lot of police reports. I have a few. 1. A guy committed fraud and ended up stealing around $800 from this woman, but he left some stuff at her home that he needed for his job. He sent her a letter demanding his stuff back, where he and his attorney would turn her into the police for theft. This demand letter was attached to the report that had been filed against him from fraud. That was a good one. 2. There was a dude in court one day so incapable of following simple orders that the judge stopped, asked if he was intoxicated, and threatened to have him sent to get tested. And if he was, he'd be found in contempt of court. That was really hard to sit through straight-faced because that dude was dumb. 3. The police responded to a domestic or disorderly. They asked the suspect to step aside to talk to them. He refused and they tried to arrest him. Something happened and he responded, "Hey, female dog, make me," to one of the officers, and he was promptly tased. Story 36. I only pretend to be a cop for erotic purposes, but my buddy used to live in a house with one of those constantly drunk and forever in the middle of a fight with his girlfriend type of guys. So, naturally, the dude gets into a fight with his girlfriend drunk as hell and drives off into the night at a high rate of speed. He crashes through/over a small brick wall literally 34 seconds later. His truck is stuck in the wall, so he calls my buddy to drag him out. Keep in mind, this is in someone's front yard. My buddy drives down the street, literally down the street and one left, to the scene of the accident. Neither of them have tow straps, so my friend takes his roommate back to his house to grab some. They show back up and miraculously, no cops yet. My buddy is sitting in his truck while his drunk roommate is fixing the straps. Gives the thumbs up. My buddy hits the gas and starts to pull the truck. The straps completely snap. Cop shows up immediately after, assesses the situation, and starts laughing his butt off. The drunk fool grabbed 25 feet of cheap Harbor Freight extension cord and 3 surge protector strips that he tied to each end for, quote, increased strength. The cop was so amused he didn't even arrest the guy, just made him give verified contact info to the homeowner to replace the wall. Story 37. An old roommate was telling me about his younger/dumber days. Him and a buddy were drunk driving home and buried the car in a snowbank. They had to roll down the windows to climb out as they couldn't open the doors. It was the middle of the night in a sleepy town, so they figured they could go grab his dad's truck and pull the car out real quick before a cop happened by. Well, after they returned with the truck, they figured it would be even faster to just loop the tow rope through the windows instead of digging out the tow hitch. Needless to say, the canopy trapezoided when they pulled on the strap and broke every window on the car. So now the car is still buried in snow, but the roof and window struts are all yanked back at a 45-degree angle. They just said screw it, we're too drunk, and left the car till morning. The cops never said anything, probably figured destroying their car was punishment enough and couldn't prove drinking the next day, but his dad did deal with it in his own way. Story 38. Back when I was a patrol officer, I pulled over a car once for speeding. As I was walking up to the driver's side window, I tripped on a rock in the shoulder of the road and fell right on my face by the window. It was one of those, comical, cartoonish falls. I got up as quickly as I could, and as I was standing up, my foot slipped and I fell again. I finally stood up out of breath to this woman just staring at me in disbelief. After about 3 seconds of silence, we both busted out laughing. We both couldn't regain composure after that, and I managed to just get out, please slow down and be safe, as I walked back to my car with tears streaming down my face. I still laugh when I think about it. Story 39. Not the funniest, but one of my shorter stories. I got a call of a reckless driver. The report was of a blue Buick sedan that was failing to maintain its lane. It was going erratic speeds, so on. So I pulled it over and approached the driver's side window. It was raining pretty good. The driver was an extremely overweight 40s-something female. She was wearing a large winter coat and trying to pull her right sleeve up so she could fit her arm in a McDonald's bag that was full of Big Macs. She was also eating one when I approached her. I told her why I pulled her over and about the reports I got on her driving. She then just said to me, "You know how hard it is to get into a bag of Big Macs with a big coat on?" I honestly just started laughing out loud. She was really nice and polite, and she definitely saw the humor in the whole scenario. The best part is the closest McDonald's was about 45 minutes north of my town. I'm sorry, completely unrelated. There are towns without a McDonald's? I thought their whole thing was they're everywhere. Where do you live, OP? Story 40. Dad is retired, but he was a cop in a small town for years. My favorite story was when he got called to a domestic and the guy was high out of his mind. He wouldn't come out of his apartment, so they spent a fair amount of time trying to get this resolved without breaking anything. All of a sudden, the guy pulls out a blowtorch of sorts and starts yelling at the cops to leave. After a few tense moments, the guy yells, "If you don't leave, we're gonna have roast pig tonight," and starts brandishing the blowtorch. Doors were kicked down soon after. Still ends me to this day. He also had to save a snapping turtle once, except, like the guy above, the snapping turtle didn't want to be saved. It took him nearly 45 minutes to get this thing out of the road because it kept snapping at him and going after him. The dash cam footage is hilarious. Story 41. Not a cop, so I should fit in here well. Once got pulled over while riding my motorcycle. Back then, I'd listen to music through one earpiece because I figured it's no different to the radio in a car, right? Well, cue that bit in Bohemian Rhapsody, and I'm having myself a good little rock out at 50 miles per hour. Settle back down, and I'm immediately pulled over by cops who I'm sure weren't there a minute ago. Took my helmet off, and when they approached and saw the headphone, they made that "oh" face. And they explained they thought I was having a seizure, so cut across 2 lanes of traffic to stop me, complimented me on my taste in music, and sent me on my way. Story 42. Not a cop, but maybe one's funniest story. My drive to work is just over an hour away, mostly rural, and when I'm driving to work at midnight, nothing is open. So on this particular night, I'm driving to work when a gurgle in my stomach hits me. Oh no, I have to crap. I still have about 25 minutes left in my drive, and I am determined to make it to work. So I'm driving along and the sweats start to hit me. I know I'm not going to make it. And as I mentioned, no place I could possibly stop at is open at this hour. Now I'm on the hunt for any place I could get away from the road and take care of business when I happen upon an auto repair shop with 2 dumpsters next to it. I pull my car into the parking lot as fast as I can and grab the first paper item I can, which happens to be an empty McDonald's bag. I penguin walk as fast as I can with sweat pouring down my face, praying I can make it that 10 feet. I get between the dumpsters, drop my pants, and instantly fire a rope of semi-solid projectile crap. Instant relief. I had made it and not crapped my pants. I instantly regretted my hurried choice of toilet paper as I begin to wipe the horrid semi-solids from the starfish as a cop pulls up the side road, looks to his left to see me pants around my ankles with a McDonald's bag around my hand like a crap mitten, looks at me for a hard 2 seconds, shakes his head, and keeps on driving. Story 43. My friend and I always pulled pranks on each other. I had this great idea to dress as a gorilla, knew someone that had the full costume and would loan it to me to her party, hoping it would take her all night guessing who it was. Of course, I added a couple pairs of socks underneath thinking this would make it that much funnier. I drove to her apartment and of course, there was no close parking, so I had to park a complex over. Figured, well, I better put the gorilla head on now, in case someone from the party saw me. Guess another resident called the cops. Cops drove by me real slow, then got out of their car to talk to me. They didn't take their eyes off my gorilla privates and asked me to take my headpiece off. When they saw I was a female, they both raised their eyebrows and laughed. They asked what I was doing. After all was explained, one of the cops asked why I felt the need to have a hard-on. At that point, I was totally embarrassed and wanted to die. Hold on, was the whole hard-on thing supposed to be the couple of pairs of socks underneath? I was really confused what that meant. But also, what? I can't even conjure this image in my mind. I wish this came with a picture. Story 44. Not a cop, but my uncle was a homicide detective in Bakersfield, California back in the old days. One day they got a call that a man had brutally assaulted a woman. She knew the man only slightly, had no idea where he lived, but she knew what he looked like. My uncle got some critical info from her. She was pretty sure he played piano in a C&W band. As luck would have it, every Saturday the local TV station featured a live C&W performers. This was the 50s, when TV was primitive and mostly live. Together, my uncle and the victim watched TV at the police station. The show started, but the camera was fixed on the singer. Like it always is, am I right? They wanted to see the piano player. So during the program, my uncle called the TV station. He asked to speak to the manager, and told the guy, "Say, that's my brother Ed playing the piano on your show. It's his birthday today, and we'd sure appreciate it if you got some time on the TV." Sure enough, within a minute, the camera swung toward the piano player, who smiled real big for the camera. The victim screamed, "That's him." My uncle raced down to the TV station, yanked the guy off stage, and cuffed him. He said that toothy grin and "that's him" stayed with him forever. A satisfying bust. OP, not 100% sure this fits in with the rest of the thread, but it is a very satisfying way to catch someone. But I think it only happened because they didn't know that it was a cop calling, which is kind of the opposite of the thread. Story 45. Not a cop, but witness this. Salisbury Beach has a U-shaped street that goes around the inside of the boardwalk area. Arcades, tourist trap shops, ice cream, and pizza vendors are on the outside of the legs of the U. On the bottom of the U, there were about 8 parking spaces. There was a cop parked in one. Next to him, nearly in line with the street, was an empty spot. In front of each spot is a concrete-filled iron post at 8 inches in diameter so you can't drive onto the beach. Me and a buddy were sitting close by watching people and passing time. We watched a long 70s-era sedan drive into the empty spot next to the cop at 20 miles per hour, hit the post, causing the car to slide a bit sideways into the cop car. The cop just looks to his right to see what the hell that was all about. As he does, the guy tries to open his door, blocked by the cop car it is resting against. So he rolls down the window, crawls up onto the door, sits on the door and shouts, "I'm not drunk!" Cop calmly got out of his cruiser and arrested him. Story 46. I worked security forces, military police in the Air Force a couple years ago. Never got to do law enforcement really besides my tech school training since I got stationed in Montana, and my job was to guard nuclear weapons, which usually consisted of responding to alarms, shooing small critters away, and doing exercises to practice preventing farmers or whatever from stealing our big ol' bombs, but I digress. One day after a particularly snowy night, or rather one night after a particularly snowy day since I worked nights, we jumped into the Humvee and proceeded to do our routine checks of some of the sites. Arriving to one of them, we noticed that God must have busted the fattest load of snow on our site because it was covered. Now, this site had some really uneven ground around it, but due to the snow, it was impossible to tell what was solid ground and what was a drop into a pit of ice-cold deity ejaculate/snow. Now, I'm not good at telling stories, so I'm going to jump to the point where my buddy, who is considerably taller than me and built like Stevie's steroid pig from Family Guy, accompanied me on my sweep before moving on to the next site. So he is behind me as we clear the outside of the perimeter fence, checking for holes and things of that nature. When I turn around, he's just gone. Like nowhere to be seen. Only the site and the Humvee with our other 2 dudes in it waiting on us, laughing their butts off, like absolutely hysterical. At this point, I had no clue what happened. I was a little confused as to the location of my buddy and why the other guys were laughing. I was almost finished with the sweep, so I decided that nothing bad is happening and finish it up. Time between noticing my friend was gone and me finishing my sweep was approximately 10 seconds. We were literally right there and about to go hop in the Humvee and let one of the others take care of whatever else. Being from Texas, I was ready to get out of the snow. So rounding back to the Humvee where my fellow airmen crying from laughter await, to find out that while my buddy was behind me, he must have stepped onto a seemingly level space of ground, only for it to be a steep little drop covered in snow. They watched this massive and intimidating bruiser slow fall face first in the most dramatic fashion into the snow and completely disappear, only for me to turn right around after with the most puzzled look on my face. Then after a very brief pause, continue my sweep. I didn't see him fall, but I got to help him get out, and that was hilarious too. The whole ordeal didn't last nearly as long as I'm sure it sounds, and it almost adds to how hilarious it was. Like it was designed by fate to happen in the funniest possible sequence of events. Maybe it's one of those had to be there things. It really was quite hilarious, and I wish I had video of it because I'm sad I missed the initial fall, but all in all it was one of the most comedic moments of my military career, given how I eventually ended up with a medical discharge for severe anxiety and depression. Completely unrelated to this incident. Story 47. We kept getting calls from this old lady who lived alone. Maybe she had dementia or something, but definitely suffered some type of mental illness. Every time she called, it was because of a ghost that lived in her attic. One day, my partner had enough of it, and we went in searching for the perp. We took one of her garbage bags, filled it with air, tied it closed, and came out of her house. We convinced her we arrested the specter. We put it in the backseat of our unit and told her the problem was over. Of course, we were in an awesome mood by that point and nearly laughing out loud. She was very grateful to us. It was actually kind of sad to see someone that far gone, but she never called again. Apparently, though, we went too far by trying to put the bag and ghost on the books as evidence. You gotta have fun once in a while. Story 48. We got called out to check the welfare of a large guy laying face down in a yard. We rolled him over and did a sternal rub to try to wake him up, and it worked way too well. As he popped up, screaming at the top of his lungs, his mother comes out. She scolds him for not behaving like a grown man like he should. He's still raging and takes a clumsy haymaker swing at us. Before we can restrain him, his mother delivers a forward/backward smack to his face, then pulls down his pants and starts spanking his giant 28-year-old man butt. The humiliation of that happening in front of the rather large crowd that had gathered at that point was punishment enough. We left him in his house for his mother to deal with. Story 49. Best one I've heard from a friend who's an LEO. Guy calls 911 and reports that someone broke into his house and stole a bunch of stuff. 911 dispatches my friend to the residence. My friend arrives and the guy's clearly high. My friend asks, So, what happened? The guy says, Some guy broke into my house and stole my rocks. My buddy thinks for a moment and says, Do you know who may have stolen these drugs? And he goes, Yeah, my dealer. Without skipping a beat, my friend responded, Why did your dealer steal it? He goes, 'Cause I couldn't pay him. My buddy fired back, and how much do you owe him? He goes, About 40. My friend goes, All right, 1 minute. Goes to his patrol car, calls in a couple of undercover cops because they got unmarked cars. They arrive and they give this guy $40 and said, Call up your dealer and tell him to bring back your drugs and tell him you got $40. He's thanking the officers for ignoring the fact that he's committing a crime and helping him get his crap back. Dealer comes around, guy pays $40 for it, they exchange, both get arrested. Apparently the dealer was real mad. Story 50. The bars were letting out. Two guys who walked out from the bar decided to stand in the middle of an intersection and begin directing traffic. They were doing well. Traffic was flowing, hey, even had a whistle. Though they were partially clothed. They flagged me through the intersection and I followed their directions. I hit my blue lights and stop. They continued to tell me they've got it and they don't need help. After several minutes trying to find them a ride without success, I placed them under arrest for public intoxication. They began to argue about where they went wrong, saying, Dude, it wasn't his turn to go, that's why he stopped us, etc. They then argued about wanting a cigarette. One had the cigarettes, the other had the lighter. Their hands were both handcuffed behind their backs. I watched in my rearview mirror on the way to booking, as one went through the other's pockets, got the smokes, and the other bent over to put two in his mouth. This went on for a few minutes, passing the lighter between them, and bending over to each other's hands. We got to jail about the time that the guy with the two burning cigarettes in his mouth was passing it to the mouth of his friend, without the use of hands. It was a small town. I rolled down the windows and did another lap around the block, laughing the entire time. They didn't finish the cigs, but we were all laughing by the time the jailers got them out of my car. Story 51. Not a cop, but I used to be a volunteer officer. The stories we heard in Academy. Best one I remember goes as follows. Rookie, literally his first week out of the academy, was riding with his field training officer to the scene of someone who took their own life. They get there and find the guy put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The top of his head was now all over the wall and ceiling. They're one of the first to arrive on the scene, so their job is to secure it until the detectives arrive. Even when it is obvious that it is self-inflicted, there needs to be an investigation to confirm it. The rookie is given the assignment of staying in the room with the body to make sure nobody touches anything. Between all the blood, gore, and thick stench of death filling the room, everyone was expecting the rookie to get sick and vomit, but he didn't. He kept his composure very well. The detective finally arrives on the scene and enters the room with the rookie still there. Detective looks over at the rookie and says, "You doing okay?" Rookie responds, "Just fine, thanks." At this point, the detective walks over to a corner of the room, finds one of the guy's eyeballs laying on the floor. He picks it up, holds it at eye level, points it in the direction of the rookie, and playfully says, "I've got my eye on you." Rookie doubles over and throws up all over the floor. Lesson: everyone's stomach has a limit. Story 52. Arrested a guy for assaulting his 70-something-year-old grandmother. We place him in the back of the patrol car and he smashes his forehead into the plexiglass. At this point, he's cursing us and acting like a complete jerk, really. In order to book him into jail, we had to get him medically cleared, so we take him to the hospital. As we get there, I explain to the doctor the reason he's here and why we picked him up in the first place. Of course, he's still acting like a jerk to me, and all of the hospital staff as well. I tell the doc he beat his mother senselessly, and the doc says, "Oh, okay." As in, now I see what kind of guy he's dealing with. He walks over to the guy, bypasses all pain meds, and proceeds to staple this guy's forehead shut. The guy starts flipping out and the doc walks away smiling. Story 53. A couple of colleagues and I were searching a house for weapons after a guy had threatened his mum with a samurai sword. We were in his room finding knives, swords, a crossbow, when one of my colleagues picks up a cylinder from the bed. I stared at him gobsmacked as he held it with his bare, ungloved hands, only to hear him ask, "What the hell is this?" Between laughing my butt off and gasping for breaths, I managed to tell him, "It's a, toy." He bangs it to get off. Colleague stared at his slimy, recently used prize for a second, before squealing like a pig and launching it across the room. Story 54. Got a call that there was a man tied up face down in a front yard. When I got there, this guy wasn't moving and was face down with his arms and legs pulled tightly to his body. I didn't see any rope or anything, but the dude was blindfolded. I spoke to him and he sat right up with a bunch of grass in his mouth. Dude was not happy to see the police, and made some comments about how I was oppressing him and he wasn't hurting anyone, yada yada. I asked him what he was doing, and he stated he was eating grass and meditating. This man identified as a ninja of the earth, and was attempting to draw out other Earth ninjas with his vibrations. He was on his mother's property, so I tell him he can continue to do it, but he has to do it somewhere less visible so as to not cause alarm. I saw the dude like 4 more times over the next week. He was always alone though, so I guess the other Earth ninjas weren't answering his call. Tough luck, guy. Story 55. We had a guy shoplift several adult toys, got caught, and a report was generated. Funny in itself. But the best part was the arresting officer recanting what was stolen in a full courtroom and about 12 other giggling police officers. Your Honor, he stole a self-pleasuring device, a rubber chicken, and a blow-up lifelike female doll. I guess he was trying to sound professional, but ended up making it 10 times more hilarious. Judge shot the police the dirtiest grow-up look. Yeah, that's definitely one of the situations where if you try to censor it or make it professional, you just make it worse. Just say the things, man. Story 56. I was working risk management for raves off duty. Last Halloween at one of our shows, as usual, everyone was tripping balls, and someone equally high was going down the line giving out light shows. 2 uniformed cops came in and stood at the end of the line just observing when Mr. Light Show gets right in the face of one of the cops and proceeds to give them the most epic light show, completely clueless that it was a real, honest-to-God, uniformed police officer. The cop looks bewildered, and then him and his partner realize what's up. The partner starts to pull out his cuffs when someone in the audience realizes what's going on. They fly across the room, grab Mr. Light Show, and drag him away like a hawk catching a mouse. While he's still trying to do a light show, it was the funniest what the hell thing I saw in a long time. Story 57. I work for a towing company in a major South Florida city that works with a few police departments. One night I get called out to assist on someone who took their own life at an intersection with a car blocking the road. Guy shot himself in the head at the light. Vehicle locked and running. CSI and officers waiting on me to open the vehicle. I arrived on scene, grab my lockout tools, walk up to the car, and before I even did, I knocked on the driver's door and told the dead guy to please open the door. I did this a few times and had everyone cracking up. Story 58. Not a cop, but a coworker of mine is a retired cop, and he enjoys telling this story. He received a call one night involving a break-in at a residence, so he swings by expecting some stolen items and to fill out a report. When he arrives at the home in question, he sees a guy hog-tied, rodeo-style, on the front lawn, and a woman in a robe on the front porch drinking coffee. Apparently, the owner of the house heard the would-be burglar and woke up to confront him. The owner of the home also happened to be a rodeo cowboy. The owner proceeds to overpower the burglar, beat him to submission, and then hog-tie him. The best part was, immediately afterwards, the owner tells his wife that he has to get ready for work. He leaves for work and has his wife just stay with the burglar till the cops showed up. Story 59. I was dispatched to this call that I'll never forget. Mom calls because she needs a key to unlock her daughter's handcuffs. Ends up that she came home early from work and heard boyfriend jumping out the window. Daughter was stuck with legitimate handcuffs to her bed in an obvious state of undress. When we get there, the mom has covered up the 17-year-old daughter as best she could, but they both looked absolutely mortified. You can probably imagine how hard it was not to laugh as we were taking the cuffs off this poor girl. In case anybody doesn't know this, all handcuff keys are the same. God only knows what possessed the two of them to use the real thing. Story 60. Answering for my SO, who's a police officer. He once pulled over a college-aged girl for running a stop sign. When he got up to her window, he saw that she had a box of donuts in her passenger seat and one in her hand with a bite out of it. She froze with the donut in hand, looked him in the eye, and stuffed the whole thing in her mouth in one bite. He asked her what her problem was. "I thought you'd take it from me." He laughed enough to let her off with just a warning. I asked him once if she gave him a donut and he declined to answer. Story 61. Not a police officer, but this is the story of when my friends and I handed a helpless drunk in at the station. It was Boxing Day, it was cold. Two friends and I had been out for a few drinks and were heading home. In the middle of a pedestrianized bit of the city center, we saw someone quite deliberately lying down. We figured that we should ask him what was going on. He told us that he was going to sleep there. He wasn't homeless, just very, very drunk. He wasn't at all equipped for a night sleeping rough in December. Had someone not moved him on, there's a good chance he wouldn't have woken up in the morning. We tried to convince him to get a taxi home, but he wasn't having any of it. But we did manage to talk him into walking with us for a bit. The city's main police station was on our way home, and we figured we could just dump him there. Maybe they could sort him out, or at least give him a nice warm cell until he was sober enough to look after himself. So we arrived in the reception area of the police station. It was late, so it was just us in there. We spoke to the desk sergeant, who said there wasn't an awful lot they could do. It seems there's a tradition in the UK of domestic violence on Boxing Day, and they were rather busy dealing with 101 domestic calls all over the place. The sergeant realized that she couldn't just chuck him out onto the street, though, and started questioning him to try and figure out what they could do to get him somewhere safe and warm. The only problem was, he wouldn't talk to her. We ended up with the bizarre scenario where he would only talk to my friend. He was happy enough if my mate passed on her questions, but had no intention of talking to the police. "Where do you live?" And then my friend, "Where do you live?" Drunk says a place about 10 miles away. "Does he have anywhere he can stay nearby?" "Do you have anywhere you can go nearby? Do you have any mates you can stay with?" Drunk is incomprehensible, though. "Does he have any money on him for a taxi?" "Do you have any money?" At this point, his drunk brain made the logical leap that my two friends and I are trying to rob him and get his money off him. The fact that we'd have to be pretty stupid to do this in the reception area of a police station seemed to pass him by. He realized there was a nice police officer standing mere feet away from us and started screaming bloody murder. She launched into one of the sternest telling-offs I've ever heard between two adults, telling him how he should be ashamed, as, "These three lads have done everything they can to help you, and that we weren't trying to rob him." She thanked us for bringing him in and said she would deal with it. I didn't see any reports in the news of people freezing to death that night, so I'm guessing he managed to find somewhere to sleep. Story 62. Late to the party, but this happened about a month ago and I lost it. See a guy passed out drunk under a tree. Walk up and shout, "Hey, I'm a police officer, do you need any help?" Blah blah blah. So I do a sternum rub and he slowly opens his eyes and I again tell him I'm an officer. He looks up at me, puts his finger to his mouth and shushes me. He would fall back asleep. I would wake him and he would do it again. I couldn't help but think about the It's Always Sunny episode where the guy shushes them. When EMS got there, they asked him basic questions and he would give crazy answers. Who's the president? Lindsay Lohan? Etc., etc. Story 63. Not a police officer, but I'm a law enforcement major and most of my professors are former officers. My criminal investigation professor told us about the story behind the rule at their police department. Don't press the suspect. To understand the story, you first need to know about Bill. Bill was this huge hulk of a man. He could bench press over 200 pounds. The kicker is that he looked like your stereotypically fat, donut-eating cop. So my professor was out with him working one day, and they end up arresting someone. They go through the motions, get down on the ground, hands behind your back, handcuffed, and then Bill tells the guy to get up. This guy, trying to be all rebellious, says, "Why don't you pick me up, fat man?" So Bill obliged. He grabs the guy by the legs and collar of his shirt and presses the guy straight into the air and holds him there. The guy starts freaking out, yelling for Bill to put him down, and he just goes, "I thought this was what you wanted." So after that, my professor had to have a private talk with Bill about how it was inappropriate conduct and he should refrain from pressing any other offenders. Not what I thought with the phrase, "don't press the suspect," but fair enough. Story 64. Probably not the funniest story, but once I got pulled over for failure to stop at a stop sign and speeding. The speeding one, I won't argue. I wasn't really paying attention, so I have no idea how fast I was going. But failure to stop, I call BS on that to this day. I even made a point of stopping longer than usual because I saw the cop. I think he was just bored. Long story short, he lets me off with a warning. So I'm like, alright, just so that I don't tear out of here and get pulled over 10 feet down the road, what's the limit here? This guy, no joke, looks both directions for a sign, failing to see one, and says, "I don't know, just do 45 to be on the safe side." I couldn't believe it. I really wanted to yell at him and be like, "So how fast was I going that you pulled me over without knowing the limit? 80? But this was the military and I was deploying in 2 weeks, so I didn't want to risk any trouble. I just said thanks, rolled up my window, called him a jerk, and moved on with my night. Story 65. My cop friend told me this one a while back. Man is said to be sitting in his car on the side of a very public street, pleasuring himself with a bra on. As my friend walks up to him, he quickly tosses the bra off. So he says, "Sir, I've gotten some calls about a man sitting in his car, pleasuring himself while wearing a bra. You don't happen to know anything about this, do you?" Of course, the guy denies having any knowledge of this act. So my friend asks him to step out of the car, and more denials come out of this guy. My friend can't technically do anything about it, so he sends him on his way. But as the guy is walking back to his car, apparently he was of the chubby persuasion, my friend notices the deep red imprint of a bra all the way across the man's back. He said there was no chance of containing his laughter. The guy knew exactly what my friend saw, so he ran to his car and took off. Story 66. Not a cop, but I used to work armed security at a large casino. Set up for a special event. We have 5 deputies on site and a full 10-person security force. We'd erected barricades to control entry into the event. These barricades are about 4 feet high, metal, and they interlock with one another to make a pretty good wall. So the line for the event is beginning to form up. People are drunk and getting impatient. One guy and his group of friends keep asking if we can let them in. They're VIP. They're willing to pay us to let them cut in line. We keep denying them. 10 minutes go by. I turn around for 1 second to answer a question, and one of the guys from the group tries to hop the barrier right in front of me. He catches his toes on the top of it, goes over, face plants onto the concrete, knocks out 3 teeth, and we arrest him for public intoxication. Story 67. My uncle is a canine unit, and he's got some pretty good stories. My favorite is one time they stopped a guy, I don't remember what for, not too important. It was around late winter, early spring, and the guy decides he can outrun the old, out-of-shape cops despite his saggy pants and the risk of scuffing up his fancy kicks. So my uncle hits his button to let his dog out of his squad car, and the dog gets out and starts running towards the guy. I guess now is a good time to mention that they were by a bridge, which the guy jumped off of once he saw the dog. My uncle and the other cops on scene walked over to the riverbank and told the guy he had probably a minute or two before he got hypothermia and passed out. And if he tried for the other bank, his dog was fast enough to get over there and catch him. But he wasn't, and his dog was hard of hearing, so might not hear him calling it off. They also told him they wouldn't be able to save him once hypothermia set in, since none of them could swim. Not true. My uncle is a licensed scuba instructor. He gets to help when they search rivers and stuff. But his dog could, and while his dog was a great retriever, he never taught him how to keep a person's head above water while he was swimming back to shore. So that might not be the guy's best option. And they really didn't want to deal with the hassle and paperwork from a suspect drowning himself. At this point, there was an audience that had gathered to watch the cops catch this guy swimming in the river with snow on the ground. The guy realizes he's screwed, so he starts swimming to shore. My uncle and the other cops start getting worried because this guy's having a lot of trouble swimming, and they really hope they don't have to jump in and save him. Once he makes it to shore, they realize that his trouble swimming was because his saggy pants had slipped down around his ankles, along with his boxers. So this poor guy has his pants and boxers around his ankles, my uncle holding back a very angry and loud police dog, snapping at him a foot from his face, and a crowd of onlookers cheering at his shrinkage, while he's getting cuffed and taken to jail. Story 68. I'm not a police officer, but I'm scribing this for a buddy I work with. Him and one of his friends were out at a bar one night. They hadn't been drinking too much, but just happened to leave at the right time to notice two officers heading toward the door. Being nosy, they decided to have a smoke off to the side so they could hear what was going on. The cops told the bouncer they got a call that a wanted man was inside drunk, and asked if he would go ask him to come outside without telling him the cops were there. The bouncer heads inside and the cops positioned themselves on each side of the door backed off enough so the guy wouldn't be able to see them when you walked out. The bouncer comes back with a scrawny, white trash-looking guy, and as soon as he gets out of the door, the one cop jumps him from behind and tries to grab his arms. The guy squirms his arms off and ends up elbowing the cop trying to restrain him in the face. The other cop decides it's finally time to do something and pulls his mace. While the elbowed cop and the suspect are struggling, the mace cop fires off his mace, and like a freaking cat, the suspect ducks and the first cop takes the pepper spray right to the busted up face. The pepper spray cop starts apologizing, and while he's distracted, the suspect pushes the maced cop onto the other and takes off running. The two cops ended up lying there for a few minutes before calling for backup. The best part was the bouncer just watched the whole thing and was like, "Nah, I'm out, man." Story 69. Was double crewed with a really well-spoken guy. Not what you'd expect from the area where I was from. Anyway, we had arrested this horrible guy who is well known for drugs and violence. We were in custody and my colleague was completing a search of this guy so he could be put into a cell. This guy's been mouthing off from the moment we arrested him, threatening to bite people's noses off among other things. So I'm watching him whilst the search is being completed to make sure he didn't lash out at my colleague. Whilst I'm watching him, I noticed my colleague had momentarily stopped searching. I looked at him and he's holding a small item in his hand with a confused look on his face. I couldn't see it properly because he was holding it, but it seemed to be a smallish chrome capsule type object, and my colleague was struggling to get it open. It dawned on me shortly after what he was holding, as I attempted to relay that information to my colleague in a discreet manner, but I was too late. "What is this, then?" "That's my bird's vibe." His face was a picture. All the color just seemed to drain from it as his expression dropped whilst I tried as hard as I could to keep it all together and not bust out laughing. Fortunately, he was wearing gloves. As he fumbled with it, putting it on the custody desk, he managed to activate it, as it started to vibrate on the desk in front of the detention officer who at this point was holding back tears of laughter. He then struggled to turn it off again, before having to ask the arrested person to switch it off, who then in turn made some homophobic remarks implying that he never had a woman before and wouldn't be able to satisfy them like he could. I just about managed to hold it together until we locked his cell door before I burst out laughing. If it happened to anyone else, it probably wouldn't have been as hilarious, but it was just how posh and well-mannered this guy was having to deal with something so vile. Story 70. Was walking to work, jaywalked around the middle of a block. I get about halfway across the street and see a police car around the corner, empty lot, flip on his lights and blast the siren as he speeds to stop me, gets out of the car, hand on gun holster and yells, "Hands on the hood." He eventually asks where I'm going, which I normally don't answer because it has nothing to do with anything. But that day, my work uniform for a very well-known and liked business was clearly visible, even with my jacket on. I looked down at my chest, back at him, and yeah. This stop was particularly irritating to me, because the area was riddled with drug dealers. In the 3 years I lived/worked there, I walked to and from work every day, and was offered drugs coming and going. I never saw a cop even glance at the obvious dealers. Story 71. Former patrol officer. Domestic disturbance call from the house next to the sketchiest apartment building in the city. Female complained of an argument with a male who had since left. I had my suspicions about the nature of their relationship when she had to guess at his first name. Being Captain Information-Based Policing, I rattled off my usual questions about him, down to phone number, at which point she thought a moment, reached under her skirt and deftly detached her prosthetic leg. It was scrawled with the names of her clients written in permanent marker. Finding the number, she held it up for me to copy. My backup exchanged a look with me and I knew I would never be rid of this moment. I'd forgotten about it days later when a random officer from another squad asked me how my girlfriend, Peggy, was doing. Story 72. Not a cop. Was traveling on a slow-moving 2-lane, 1-lane each direction rural highway with heavy traffic. Speed limit 50 miles per hour, but traffic moving no faster than 30. A driver about 2 cars behind me gets impatient and decides to pass me and probably 5 other cars by pulling left over a double yellow line. He passed all 5 cars, but before he can pull back to the right, he causes an oncoming CHP patrol car coming the other direction to have to hit the dirt to avoid a head-on collision. The CHP officer does a skillful high-speed U-turn out of the dirt into the other lane to pursue the guy. It would have made Starsky and Hutch proud. The miscreant saw that he was doomed and just pulled over. I didn't get to see what happened next, but probably anything from an arrest for reckless driving to a beatdown. Story 73. Not a cop, but I have a story about my stupid friend. My friend was at a party, and the person who was driving them around left to go hang out with some girl. His friend then decided to drive a dump truck home. So he went to a yard, found the keys in the visor, and drove it home. Then he got hammered at home and passed out. In the morning, he jumped up and felt bad about taking the truck, so he called the police to report he took the dump truck. The owner was laughing so hard he was crying, and the cop just shook his head and called my friend an idiot. I thought it was hilarious, but happy he didn't get into any trouble. Hey, he came clean. I guess that counts for something, right? I'm amazed he didn't get into more trouble. Story 74. Not me, but I have a family member in the highway patrol. He told me this funny story. One day he pulled this woman over for speeding. After coming to a stop, he walked up to her window and gave her the classic, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" She quickly responded that she knew that she was speeding, but asked if she gave him an excuse for why she was speeding that he had never heard before, could he just let her off with a warning. She then said, "If you've heard this excuse, I will gladly sign your speeding ticket." He laughed and said he'd been with the highway patrol for so long that he's heard them all, but told her to at least try. At that moment, the woman pulled a vial of horse seed from between her breasts and explained how she was a horse breeder and needed to get the sample to its location for insemination before it went bad. After he finished laughing, he let her off with a warning. Story 75. I wasn't a real cop, but I was Air Force Security Forces, military police, and I was dispatched to the base exchange, essentially a small shopping mall for shoplifting call. I walked to the security office and found a very confused-looking old lady. She hadn't been searched or anything. They just had her sit down and wait for me. I asked her some questions and for ID, and she didn't seem to understand anything. The security guys had videos of her putting things in her pockets and purse, but she wouldn't respond when I asked her about it. I ended up having a female patrol meet me there and try to search her as delicately as possible. She clearly had dementia or Alzheimer's or something, because her thievery didn't make any kind of sense. She had pinwheels in her purse along with flag napkins, several packets of pens and markers, a candle. She had a small notepad in her bra strap, a vegetable peeler in her pocket, a hammer tucked in her waistline. I think it came out to 32 or 33 separate items. We had to ban her from the store, but I felt bad. Luckily, we were able to contact a relative to come get her. We weren't even sure how she got there. I guess this is really more sad than anything. Story 76. I'm not a cop, but I have a story. My friend used to be an alcoholic and would constantly drive drunk. One night after heavy drinking, she got pulled over. She was once told that the taste of silver and copper makes the smell of alcohol magically go away. So drunk friend decides to shove a bunch of change in her mouth. Cop comes to the window and starts asking her questions. She responds by spitting out coins while answering. He says, "What the hell, are you a damn slot machine?" Yeah, her butt went to jail while the cop tried not to laugh. Well, judging by the used to be an alcoholic, I would say your friend is doing better now, OP. At least I assume. So first of all, great for her. Second of all, "Are you a damn slot machine?" goes crazy. Story 78. Not me, but my dad was an officer in the LAPD back in the late 80s. Not in the worst parts, thankfully, but still has his share of stories. The most memorable was one day he and his partner were on their normal patrol route when they spot a car driving all over the road. So they light up and pull this guy over. My dad's partner goes out and walks up to the car and taps on the window for the guy to roll it down. When he does, my dad sees his partner recoil, turn to the squad car where my dad is, and mouth the words "angel dust," which is PCP. People on this can behave very violently and can be very difficult to subdue, often injuring officers in the attempt. Thus, my dad immediately calls in a report of someone on PCP and requests assistance. As he does this, my dad's partner orders the driver to exit the vehicle and place his hands on the hood of the car. The man waddles out of the car while grinning and places his hands on the left side of the hood. My dad exits the squad car and proceeds over to the right side of the car they pulled over. His partner begins patting the still giggling man down and then comes across a solid L-shaped object in the back of the man's pants. He signals my dad to report a possible gun. So my dad goes and quickly reports they may be dealing with a man on PCP with a gun. Very shortly after that, they hear sirens start up in various directions a distance away. My dad resumes position on the right side of the car, and his partner begins trying to question the man. He asked him if he was on any medication, who he was, and what was in his pants. To each question, the man only giggled, but giggled even harder and began to fidget when they mentioned what was in the back of his pants. At him fidgeting, my dad and his partner got a bit nervous, and my dad's partner once again asks what's in the back of his pants. The man begins fidgeting even more, as well as swaying, all while giggling hysterically. At this point, my dad draws his gun and keeps it lowered and sees two more squad cars rapidly approaching. His partner tries once more to demand to know what the man is carrying, but cannot get a word in past the giggles at this point. The other two squad cars pull up and the officers jump out, hands on their weapons just in case. My dad's partner nods at him to be ready, preps for a moment, and then yanks the guy's pants down. My dad's partner immediately backs away, his face turning bright red, and other officers immediately laughing hysterically as the guy continues to giggle. My dad cannot see what they're seeing, crying, so he asks what it is. He hears his partner mutter something but doesn't quite understand, so once again he demands what it is. His partner just gets out the words, "Cuff him and throw him in the back," his face completely red. My dad walks around the car and sees the object the man was hiding. It was a bright red stiletto high-heeled shoe with the heel embedded firmly in the man's butt. The other officers are beginning to make jokes about why my dad's partner really pulled him over when they throw him in the back and drive over to the station in complete silence. Minus the giggling, of course. My dad's partner is furious, and when they arrive at the station, he just says, "Get the jailer," not wanting to even remove the guy from the car because he was done with the situation. So my dad goes and gets the jailer, but doesn't tell him what to expect, thinking it would be more entertaining. So he takes the jailer out to the squad car, swings open the door, and shows him the guy. The only thing the jailer says, much to my father's and his partner's surprise, is, "God damn it, not another one." Grabs the shoe, pulls it out of the guy's butt, and pulls him out of the car and leads him into the station. My dad and his partner were both stunned by what the jailer said, and later agreed that that had been one of the most hilarious outcomes to that situation that could have occurred. Story 79. Definitely the time that an older, mentally ill woman tried to burn her house down because she believed that was the only way to disarm the atom bomb in her attic. I got her to walk with me to my car and get in the back by telling her it was the only place she'd be safe. When I got in and started driving, she started yelling I couldn't take her to jail because she hadn't done anything wrong. I calmly informed her that we were going to the hospital, which prompted even louder yelling of "I'm not crazy." I replied, "I don't think you're crazy." She screamed, "Then why are you taking me to the hospital?" I told her, "Well, you were next to that atom bomb, right? We gotta get you checked for radiation poisoning." Her eyes got wide and she said, "Oh crap, I didn't think about that. You better hurry." I'm no expert on this, so anyone in the comments tell me if I'm misguided about this, but I'm pretty sure that, quote-unquote, playing along with it is actually the best thing to do with delusional patients or suspects or whatever. Like, it puts them in a calmer state if you understand what they're seeing. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I think I've heard something like that. In that case, OP did a great job here. I do hope that woman managed to get some help, though, and is no longer being threatened by atom bombs. Story 80. Showed up to a call once about a baby crying nonstop for hours and no sign of an adult being home. We went into the house and I followed the sound of the crying baby upstairs to find an 18-month-old with her arms duct-taped to her crib. I undid the duct tape and it was obvious this was not the first time it had happened. I brought the child downstairs and outside. The mom was walking up the sidewalk of the housing unit and flipped crap on me. I handed the child off to a patrol and cuffed her. It was the most satisfying clicking of handcuffs I'd ever heard. What happened to this thread? Did we get into a different thread somehow? This doesn't seem to be at all what the prompt was. Story 82. Attended a structural fire in a downtown high-rise. Was tasked with evacuating local residents in case the building collapsed. Third house I went to, the guy answers in a full bunny suit with a gas mask propped on his head. English wasn't his first language, and I was trying to communicate that he needed to evacuate. It became clear he was running a drug lab inside. Arrested Asian Walter White, and then had to sit in the shadow of the structure fire, keeping eyes on the house while waiting for clear, clandestine lab, team to show up. In that time, fire trucks basically surrounded my vehicle so I couldn't move it, even after clear team moved in. Walter had his lawyer call in my PC, and it was about 10 hours before we could head back to cells. I've never had to pee so bad in my life. Story 83. Dad tells the story of a guy he knew who kept getting caught for writing bad checks. He was such a big guy he wouldn't fit in the police car, so they would just meet him at the magistrate office and write him tickets. I know, some trust. But a year or so after this kept happening, he got a call that there was a domestic dispute at the house. So they rush over there and he's got an axe in his hand sitting on the front porch all bloody. They approach and tell him to put the axe down, which he does, and proceeded to tell them that his wife is in the bathtub, or at least her head is. Guy was completely open and cooperative, didn't run or anything. Asked if he could meet them at the magistrate office, and Dad was like, nah, dog. You're gonna have to get in the car this time. Story 84. First time my brother arrested someone was really funny. He and his training officer were working the graveyard shift and got a call for suspicious activity at a house. They arrive and the homeowner says there is someone sneaking around his house that shouldn't be there. So they start looking around with their flashlights. Grass is really overgrown in the backyard, and my brother notices one of those Fisher-Price kids cars, yellow and red plastic car, moving on its own. They found the guy naked and high as hell trying to hide under the kid's toy and crawl away. Training officer said, "Well, he's yours, rookie." Had my brother cuff him. Guy didn't want to go to jail and put up a naked fight, but they ended up taking him to jail anyway. Story 85. While serving in South Korea, my team was on patrol in the local drinking village when we heard someone drunkenly singing the US national anthem. At a loss for where this individual was, we finally looked up and there he was, tightrope walking on the ledge of a building 3 stories up. This is when the precision of language is of vital importance, especially when dealing with a drunk. The sergeant on scene said, "Hey, come down here," and the drunkard said back, "On my way," and proceeded to step off. Under the impression I was about to witness my first death, I was in shock. Through some weird luck/science, he glanced the hood of a slightly misted Daewoo truck and slid down to the ground. We ran over to him and he said, "Hey guys, how's it going?" He had open fractures on both femurs, and after some makeshift splinting and controlling the bleeding, he was transported to the nearest hospital. Soju is a hell of a drug. Story 86. My dad usually relates to when people ask. 1. Staking out one of LA's homeless murderers, the Skid Row Stabber. This one specifically targeted men who appeared to be homeless. So my dad was part of a task force that would assign one officer a night to be the bait. He remembers tearing up his clothes, putting them on, rolling around in the dirt, then on the street, and then finally pouring a cheap bottle of whiskey out on them. He never washed this outfit, so it just got progressively nastier while he was on the task force. He would then lie down in one of the murderer's known preferred areas, with his backup revolver, because of its size, underneath his body. He said he did actually manage to fall asleep a couple times, but mostly, even knowing there were a handful of nearby officers hidden and waiting for him to start screaming, he was too scared to do anything but lie there and shiver. 2. When he was a supervisor, one of LA's endless car pursuits entered his division's territory. His officers joined the chase, and then entered a new division as it kept going. He knew the supervisor of that division's patrol, so he hopped in a car to head over and help coordinate the chase. By the time he got there, the chase had turned into a foot chase. He radioed the other supervisor to meet him in the station parking lot as he listened to officers calling out updates on location. He had a gut feeling, and as he and the supervisor listened, started walking towards one of the walls. Sure enough, the suspect, completely lost, hopped over the fence. Literally caught the guy in his arms as he came over. I'll add a few others that I know to be nutty, but he never gives out because of various reasons. 1. The King/92 riots. He was stationed at the infamous Rampart station when these occurred as a patrol supervisor. We didn't see him for roughly a month, as he was often in the field managing a small group of officers who would move from one intersection to another, mounting high-visibility defense for 24-plus hours to discourage rioting. This job amounted to them finding a high ground they could park the patrol cars in. Half the officers would then stand around the cars in tactical gear, while the other half slept. 2. Frankly, I'd say his entire 9 years at Rampart were insane. The whole Rampart scandal broke out during his time there, and he obviously knew and worked with most of them at some point. I knew a few of them from spending a lot of time at the station/LAPD get-togethers. Some of the most surreal crap happened as part of this scandal, and the movie's a goddamn travesty. Not just for the meme-worthy AMA, but the fact it didn't tackle the wild crap that went down. 3. Prior to Rampart, he did a stint with Air Division. He relates that often, as the officer, he would be strapped into a harness and then would step out of the helicopter while it was flying and would stand on the landing skid, leaning out until the harness supported him. He spent most of the LA Summer Olympics like this. 4. The one shooting he speaks about was a situation that unfortunately wasn't the rarest for police, but scares the crap out of me to think about, and it added to my father's existing PTSD issues from Vietnam. He and his partner were called to a domestic dispute. The neighbors called in because it was getting louder than usual. They parked on the street at the end of the driveway to the home, and the moment they exited the car, the man pushed his wife and 2 kids out the door on the end of a shotgun. They all proceeded to have a shouting match while the man continued to hold his wife and kids at gunpoint. They were, of course, pleading for him to put it down, let them go, and everything could be sorted out peacefully then. He wasn't having it. During the argument, the man pointed the shotgun at my father and his partner and fired at them. My dad and his partner returned fire at the same time. My dad ended the story there for many years, saying, "The man died there. Either my shot or the partner's connected." My mother filled in the blanks. The partner's shot went high. My dad's got him in the chest, just below the shoulder. He was dead before EMTs arrived. About 20 years afterwards, he finally opened up about the PTSD he had from this incident. He says, "We were right, and every day I think about it, and there's nothing I would change about what we did. Given all the circumstances, it was the right decision. If he was willing to attempt to gun down the police, we couldn't know what would happen to his family after he had shot us. Still, I shot and took his life while his wife and young kids stood right next to him. They may someday understand why I did what I did, might understand what a bad person their dad was, but still, I ended their dad's life right in front of them. And now that I'm a father too, I get exactly where my dad is coming from. and why he couldn't shake the circumstances, even though he's convinced he did the best he could with the situation. Story 87. I'm not a cop, but my dad is, and this happened when I was on a ride along with him quite a few years ago. Relatively short one this time. After eating our lunch, we went down to a runoff point so he could finish some of his reports. That's usually why you see a lot of cops on the side somewhere that isn't directly connected to the main road. I was on my phone watching some videos when he got called in to check something that was happening up the road. I was sitting in the car when this happened, headed up the road to a construction site. By that time it had been active but non-progressing for 5 years. A bunch of people were standing around looking weird, dressed in weird suits and obvious fake construction costumes with fake hard hats. A representative of the construction company had called the police down when these people showed up and didn't say a single thing for hours. Backup arrived and about 6 cops were trying to get 24 people to say anything. After a half hour passed, every single one of the trespassers began to dance, and music began to blare from portable speakers. It went on until the song ended, at which point one of the dancers stood up and said, "Danielle, Kyle has an important question for you." Everyone was motionless until the person who stood up started looking around and asked if either of those people were there. It took another 5 minutes before a threat of arresting everyone came to head, and got the speaker to finally begin talking about what was going on. Turns out someone had hired a flash mob crew. They were a bigger thing back then, for a marriage proposal, but no one showed up. After all of that was done, my dad found out the person who hired the flash mob did so to rob a jewelry store up the road, assuming a flash mob would draw all the police to the site, not having enough intelligence to realize a flash mob trespassing on a mostly empty machine-free yard wouldn't rank higher than an armed robbery of a jewelry store. The guy was clever in a yes, no kind of way. The idea was logical, but the execution and targets were absolute dog crap. He bragged about it, and was stupid enough to think that saying, "You can't prove the flash mob was me," when literally no one asked him about the flash mob, was a good idea. He was smart, but also extremely dumb. His name was actually Kyle, and his wife was actually Danielle, and he paid the flash mob crew with his own money. I would pay to have a video of his lawyer's face. I doubt it was a fun day for them. Story 88. Not a police officer, but I know one. I'm sure he has a million stories, but my favorite that he's told me was the time he was called to a local Mexican restaurant. When he arrived, he was directed to a Cadillac in the parking lot that was a rockin', if you get my drift. He knocks on the window and a butt-naked 80-year-old woman gets out, upset that someone interrupted her getting laid. Her 80-year-old husband was laying naked in the vehicle still. This old woman stood outside of her vehicle completely naked for a solid 5 minutes, arguing with my friend about how she should be able to get laid whenever and wherever she wants. He didn't arrest them, even though she stood naked outside for 5 minutes. So she got off easy. Pun intended. Story 89. My first day on the job with a smaller department. Get an animal complaint at a house along the river. RP states there are some angry geese in her yard and they won't let her out the door. My FTO, field training officer, and I roll up, and sure enough, a gaggle of 8 big angry geese in the yard are basically barricading the little old lady in her house. We try to make a noise and scatter them, but they have no fear and go on the offensive. We retreat to take cover behind the squad car as we formulate a plan. We decide we will use the dog control poles, which we normally use to wrangle loose dogs, and try to catch these geese while keeping them a safe distance from us. The FTO gives me the brand new pole that has yet to be used. The FTO and I both grab a pole and head back into battle. I get close to one, and it takes off running. I follow in hot pursuit. I get within reach and make a diving leap with the pole, and somehow manage to get the noose around its neck and pull it tight. As my body crashes to the ground, the pole falls free of my grasp. I watch in shock as the damn goose runs into the river, dragging the brand new control pole behind. I figured the goose would slip the noose once in the water and the pole would go to the bottom of the river. Great, now the chief is going to be mad I lost the brand new pole in the river. Well, the next day we get a call from a bus driver reporting kids on the bus were upset because they could see a dead goose as they crossed the bridge, and it had appeared someone strangled it with some kind of pole. Aw, crap. Sure enough, that damn goose from the day before never shook the noose, managed to get the pole stuck on a piece of driftwood, pulled the noose tight, and strangled itself right in view of the school kids heading over the bridge on the bus. The FTO and I headed over to the boat launch, commandeered a pontoon boat, headed to the dead goose and plucked it from the river. The boater wasn't quite sure what to think of the whole ordeal, but we all ended up having a good laugh and I got our new animal control pole back. I never lived it down. TLDR, got in an altercation with a goose, lost the department's new animal control pole, upset a bunch of kids on their way to school, and commandeered a boat to retrieve the now accidentally dead goose. I mean, if the goose is running away, I guess there's not much you can do, huh? You, just gotta let it go. Unfortunate what happened, though. Those poor kids. Story 90. I was a special deputy at the Aspen Airport, Sardie Field. This was about the 90s. I was just standing around the front of the very quiet airport one summer's day, gazing at the sky, pretty stoned, I think, and in drives Hunter S. Thompson in his old red convertible. Yes, that one. He was wearing a long blonde wig and was sitting up on the back of the seat, steering with a foot. I assume he had rigged some kind of throttle control, probably just a stick. It was just me on the sidewalk and him in the traffic circle doing a slow crawl by. It was such a slow day that there were no porters on duty. He did the queen wave, just slowly going past me, and I was in stitches. One of the most surreal moments of my life. I got a private performance by one of the most strange and intelligent dudes ever. Story 91. Not me, but I was listening to a podcast, and some of you will like this. There was an assailant who walked into a grocery store and started swinging a bat at people. Customers didn't like this and swarmed him, at which point he just started emptying a handgun at nothing. He then left the store and ended up getting pulled over for something else, where he immediately starts assaulting the officer and ripping things off his belt and trying to get his gun. The cop got away, gets behind his cop car door, and aims his gun, at which point our assailant pulls out a freaking samurai sword and throws the thing like a javelin at the cop. He then got in his car and kept backing it into the cop car over and over. I'm not even doing the story justice. Small Town Murders, the podcast. Story 92. I just asked my dad, who was a cop for 30 plus years. He told me he pulled over a car full of woodchucks, old drunkards from a rural area in the northeast area of the US. He was in his late 20s at the time, so in good shape compared to the drunks. I think there were 4. While my dad was processing the driver, he had him in the front seat of his car. Once the guy realized he was probably going to be arrested, he started ripping the radio and anything he could grab out of his car. He grabbed my dad and pulled him out of the passenger side of his vehicle and onto the ground. My dad landed between this guy's legs and into some kind of leg lock chokehold. The guy, during all this, has started to scream to his friends to get his gun and murder him. Once he has him in a leg lock, he looks down and says, "Now I'm gonna end you," before he starts to choke my dad with his legs. I guess backup showed up just in time, or had been there. The deputy at the time hit him in the head with a baton and sent him out. Story 93. This story comes from a man I dated. He was a lieutenant in a special force in/near Lexington, Kentucky in the 90s that dealt with human trafficking. He was around 30 years old, married with 2 young daughters and a son at the time of the incident. He'd been on the job for 9 years, having seen numerous situations in which children had been abducted, essayed, used as slaves, lived in horrible conditions. The job had worn on him mentally and emotionally, as you can imagine. The last day as a lieutenant, his force was sent to rescue 3 little girls and arrest their abusive, negligent father. The lieutenant said it was the saddest situation he's ever seen. The girls were confined to one room of the house, chained up, emaciated, filthy, surrounded by piles of feces smeared on the walls. They'd been repeatedly essayed by their father and fed like dogs from a plate on the floor where they also slept. The stench was overwhelming. He imagined his own little daughters in that atrocious situation. Needless to say, he was furious. The girls were taken from the home. The father was arrested and handcuffed. 2 officers walked the handcuffed father to the car, 1 on each side. The lieutenant walked several feet behind. When the father stopped walking, the lieutenant told him to keep moving. This happened a few times until the father stopped suddenly, turned to the lieutenant and said smugly, "You got any daughters?" The lieutenant saw red. All he remembers is what he was told. He grabbed the father, knocked him down, and slammed his head into the pavement several times until the other officers pulled him off. He calmed down for a moment, then attacked the father again with 4 officers trying to pull him off. He smashed the father's skull into the pavement until he was dead. I don't know what charges were made against the lieutenant, if any at all. He did tell me that he lost his job and pension, though. My boyfriend, the lieutenant, told me the story with overwhelming remorse. He cried as he told it. He didn't mention it again, and I never asked. Story 94. My brother is a cop and he often shares his stories with me. I guess I could say the story is NSFW. Anyway, he tells me that he received a call from a dispatcher saying there has been screams reported in an apartment building. No other details. My brother reports to the scene, just outside the door of the apartment building. Sure enough, there's yelling. A lady is belligerently yelling, "Get it out! Get it out!" My brother pounds on the locked door. The lady eventually responds, saying that she can't get to the door and, "Please help me." My brother waits a bit, still not knowing what's going on. He hears the voice of a little boy saying he can't reach the doorknob to unlock it. My brother talks him through some steps he can take to unlock the door. Finally, the little boy is able to. He opens the door. A violently putrid smell hits my brother immediately. The little boy seems clueless and quiet. My brother notices burnt spoons and drugs scattered across the floor. He follows the voice to the room, still yelling, "Help, please get it out." He enters the room and there's blood splattered absolutely everywhere. The floor, the walls. He sees a man with his fist inside the yelling woman's kitty. She continues to yell, "Get it out, I can feel the demon inside me. Get it out." Not sure how the whole situation was de-escalated. However, after further investigation, turns out the heavy drug-using couple went to a psychic/fortune teller, where the lady was told she has something evil inside of her. Shortly after, the couple made their way to the apartment to bang, and as he's inside of her, he says, "I think I can feel the demon inside of you. Can you feel it?" And she responds, "Yes, I feel it. Put your hand in there. Get the demon out. Get it out." Which leads to the scene that my brother walks into. I have nothing else to say other than that poor child. Oh no. Story 95. Small neighborhoods in my area. Soon they become loud and obnoxious and even start throwing things at the neighbors who asked them to quiet down. The party was at some kid's house. Let's call him Gunner. He was one of the cool kids, and so a lot of kids came to the party. When they started to throw stuff at the neighbors, that's when they called me and my partner in. We arrived at the scene and everything was messed up. A lot of drunk kids everywhere, too drunk to even run away from us. Some of the cars had broken windows and others were covered with toilet paper. We asked one of the kids whose house it was, and we obviously got to Gunner. We asked him where his parents were. He just yelled, "Screw you pigs, I ain't snitching," and started to run away from us. We obviously followed, but we tried to do it as cautiously as possible because he was just a drunk underage kid. We eventually got into the kitchen. Gunner was standing there with his back to us and he started laughing maniacally. We asked if he's okay and asked to speak to his parents. Gunner turned around and had a knife in his hand. My partner Mick started freaking out. He wasn't sure if he should pull his gun or taser or whatever on an underage drunk kid. I immediately tried to calm the situation down, and then I heard an older, mature voice say, "Gunner, why the hell is there a cop car outside?" Enter Gunner's father, Mark. Mark was a big guy, and he had a lot of tattoos. Scary looking dude. As soon as he was about to enter the kitchen, Gunner threw the knife at us and ran. Mark saw the knife flying, but didn't see anyone else besides me and my partner. He immediately lost his crap. He ran at my partner, punched him in the stomach, and then started punching him in the head. My partner plummeted 16 feet through a table. That was back in '98. Gotta tell you, it was hell. But the guy ended up in a cell. I can't believe it. I can't believe I got the whole plummeting through a table story. Why does this keep happening to me, man? Usually I cut the joke ones out, but this one got me. I feel like I gotta put it in just cause they won. Story 96. On a hot midnight in the Bronx, about 3:30 a.m., got a burglary call. Me and my partner found it strange when Central gave us the address because it was a funeral home. We arrive on scene of this brownstone building and immediately see the basement lights are on. We look at each other and say, "No way. Someone actually broke in here?" So we enter through what is an open door and begin to clear each of the rooms of the funeral home/house. When we reach the basement and open what is a brightly lit body prep storage and prep room, we're immediately confronted with several bodies on tables covered in different stages of undress with bed sheets on them. Our attention is drawn to a very startled naked man holding playing cards. I look at him and simply say, "What the hell and who the hell are you?" He looks at me and my partner and nervously responds, "I'm the mortician." Wait, sorry, who are you? What are you doing? "I'm the mortician and I'm working and playing cards." "Playing cards?" my partner says. Yeah, cards. See?" Holding his hands out displaying the deck of cards. I look around and see each of the bodies have their own hands dealt to them. We asked for his ID, verified he belonged there, and proceeded to leave with a queasy feeling, laughing our butts off. Story 97. When I was little, we lived on a main avenue in a small town. My, then a police officer dad, had a serious anger problem with people speeding on our street. Like instant screaming, red-faced, throwing rocks anger. He would always write their plates down and call them into our local PD. My brother and I would joke about it all the time. Years later, when I was in college, my dad told me a story. One hot summer day, he was riding shotgun in an unmarked car looking for someone who just robbed a store. They passed a group of kids playing ball on the sidewalk. A moment later, he heard a loud bang, looked in the rear view, and saw one of the kids flying straight up into the air. Someone had been speeding up the street and slammed into the kid who had stepped off the curb to get their ball. My dad's partner turned the car around and my dad called in for an ambulance. By the time they pulled up, another car had already driven right over the kid and stopped. The kid's head was pinned between the muffler and the street, so they got every able-bodied man on the block to come and lift the car up on one side so they could slide the kid out. But when they did, his head was falling apart. Dad said he was holding the top of the kid's skull on with one hand, and that his torso sounded like there was broken glass inside. He just held him and told him to hang in there, but the kid died in his arms before the ambulance even arrived. This all happened when my brother and I were about the same age. Some days when my dad got home from work, he would immediately come and hug my brother and I. I'm guessing this was one of those days. Story 98. Dad was a police officer for 30 plus years. Couple of weird ones. Call came in. Daughter of a lady with mental problems had called in, stating the woman was threatening to shoot herself. My dad was a sergeant at the time, spent most of his time at the station in records and wrangling the patrol officers. He had past experience with the lady in question, so he grabbed one of his senior patrolmen and went out to talk to her. They approached the door, take a step to the side, and knock. She fires a couple rounds through the door. Now imagine two older dudes trucking butt back to their cruiser to take cover while she's still shooting. Eventually, they talk her down and she comes out without further incident. Take her in and off she goes to the mental ward. A week later, the cruiser comes in for maintenance because the light bar isn't working. Come to find out there's a bullet lodged in it, about 8 inches from where my dad was looking over the top of the cruiser. Other story. Fast forward a few years. Dad, now a lieutenant, was taking a smoke break. He was at one of the service entry doors that can only be opened from the inside, held open by a brick. A car comes peeling into the police department lot, screeches to a halt, and a lady jumps out screaming, "Help, help, he's gonna murder me!" And a truck comes barreling into the lot and the dude jumps out holding a gun. Dad shoves her in the door and kicks the brick out, so the door shuts. Pulls his gun and orders the guy to drop his, and the dude is still looking around for the chick, apparently ignoring my dad. Dad finally yells something about, "You better drop that piece or I'm gonna put a round in your chest," at the guy, and he finally caught on to where he was. Guy drops the gun, gets on the ground. Dad is holding him at gunpoint and calling for backup. At the same time, 2 detectives pulled into the lot. All they saw was my dad holding his gun, and they yelled, "Oh crap, this dude has finally lost it," not realizing he had some dude on the ground. Dude gets arrested and hauled into the station. Dad goes to find the lady, and she's been wandering around the lower floors of the department for like an hour lost. Bonus story. I got caught with a fake ID when I was younger. Officer that ticketed me was like, "Ah, crap," when he realized I was related to the sergeant on duty. It went across my dad's desk. He came home later that night and I got read the riot act. After that, he complimented me on how good of a fake it was, but my butt would be in a sling if I did it again. Respect to your father for disciplining his child, letting you know that his position in the law enforcement had absolutely no bearing to how laws applied to you. Also, chasing someone holding a gun to a police station? Come on, man. Do better. Story 99. Sharing on behalf of my friend who isn't on Reddit, but I showed him this thread and he wanted to tell the story because it's funny as hell. So he's a deputy in rural Louisiana. What follows are 100% his words. Responded to a call from an elderly man who lived outside of town in a nice little house near a pretty dense area of swamp. Dispatch said he was having some trouble with his stove, was hungry, and didn't know who else to call. So 2 of us head out there and were greeted by a nice but clearly a little off, older black gentleman. We ask him what's wrong with the stove, thinking we just need to light the pilot or something, and he shows us inside. House is well kept but has a lot of spiritual stuff around. So we get to the kitchen and the stove is chained shut. Clearly not going to involve lighting a pilot or flipping a breaker. Dude has a chain, a padlock, and a bunch of rope holding the stove closed. He proceeds to tell us there's a demon in the stove and he doesn't want it to get into the house. So he's locked the oven door so it can't escape. He asks if we'll take it out to the water's edge and let the demon go. We played along, carried the stove outside and rolled it down to a creek bank on a cart, a short distance from the house. He's inside watching out the window as we unchain the door and let the demon out. We roll it back up to the house, plug it back in, and he thanks us like 100 times, since he can now cook again without worrying about the demon in the stove. We stop by to check in on him now since we know he's out there alone, and he's honestly a pretty cool dude. Just really into spiritual/voodoo type stuff. Nice guy though, and we've now bonded over letting a demon out of the stove. By far one of the strangest calls I've ever been on. Story 100. Dispatched to a double stabbing. 2 victims outside. One adult with a large wound to his neck and his adult daughter with a wound to her scalp. They were in stable condition, but I could hear screaming and yelling from inside the apartment. They said the suspect, ex-wife/stepmother, is still in the house with other possible victims. I approached the door and it's already been kicked in and there's a trail of blood leading outside. There's blood on the floor and the walls. It looked like a slasher film. I go in as it is an active situation, and luckily a second officer showed up and followed me in pretty quickly. We're inside the apartment and the screaming is so loud we can't hear each other. 2 distinct voices, one yelling "Mama," and the other just incoherently screaming. We start checking doors and find one that's locked. I announce myself but get no response. I then raise my foot to blast the door open. As I do, the family's 18-year-old Down syndrome daughter opens the door and runs at me and grabs me around the waist. Her forehead runs into the muzzle of my pistol. I've never been so close to pulling the trigger, and it would have ruined so many lives. Her mother was in the next room covered in blood, but was apprehended without issue. I really thought I was going to bust the door in to find an active stabbing. That was my rookie year. I'm so thankful I didn't immediately react and took an extra half second to identify the situation. Opposite side of the coin, though, if it was the suspect that opened the door, I would have definitely been stuck with the knife before I got a round off. Story 101. Not me, but my friend saw a vehicle with no lights going about 20 miles an hour or less around the city. The absolute slowest vehicle pursuit ensues. We're laughing on the radio as she's giving their speeds, and each turn they take through residential roads, because it was the chillest, calmest pursuit any of us have ever heard or been in. Out of nowhere, a second vehicle starts ramming her patrol car. Mind you, she was still a rookie at the time, but was released from FTO, and we quickly hear the traffic on the radio go from comical to panic. Turns out the vehicle with no headlights was just stolen, like before the owners even noticed and could report it as such. However, the vehicle was a stick shift. The thief was a younger generation who didn't know how to get it into gear. The second vehicle was the accomplice, and rammed the patrol car 3 times before both the patrol and the second vehicle ended up in a ditch. Radio traffic silence. That is one of the worst sounds you could possibly encounter. For those of you not in emergency response, 5 seconds seems like 5 minutes. And especially in that line of work, my first thought is, that guy got out of the vehicle and shot my friend in the face while she was trapped in her wrecked car. To be honest, I couldn't tell you how long she was radio silent. It felt like I could have sat down and had a meaningful conversation with someone, but it was probably only 30 seconds or so. Eventually, she keys up and tells us the driver of the second vehicle ran off on foot into a residential area. Cue cop with photographic memory. He keys up and starts saying, that sounds like so-and-so. He lives at this house on this road. The mailbox looks like this. There will probably be this in the yard. And sure as crap, that was the kid and the house. They took him into custody, and we went to his sentencing with my friend as he got 7 years, part of which were to be served in a boot camp/rehab center for delinquent teens. I have other stories, but a lot of them are pretty dark, mostly listening to people die over the phone. 911 operator, but I've worked police, fire, and EMS with certificates in basic structural firefighting and EMT basic. People walking out of buildings completely engulfed in flames, watching people burn to death when their car catches fire after an accident, getting drunk and falling asleep on the train tracks and not waking up in time, scorned ex-boyfriend murdering their girlfriend in front of her family. I did have a patient one time who was mentally ill. He had tried to take his own life by stabbing himself in the stomach with butcher knives, and either the knife was old or he had used some force because the entire blade broke off in his stomach. He then walked around his apartment for 6 hours before calling 911, and he bled the entire time. It looked like a massacre had occurred in his apartment, but it was just blood from him. I've seen stints rupture and blood shoots up and hits the ceiling, spraying blood everywhere, but that was nothing compared to this. And I'm still not completely sure the reasoning, but the medics at the time did not or were not allowed to enter his apartment. I'm assuming it was because of safety precautions, because technically the guy still had a weapon inside him, so they made the guy walk down the stairs to their ambulance with the knife still broken off in his stomach, instead of him getting on a stretcher and wheeling him down. Maybe it was for liability purposes, I don't know. Story 102. A guy on a crowded street with a bottle of industrial cleaning fluid, throwing it at his drug dealer. His drug dealer was stood in a crowd of civilians. I was second officer there. Had to dodge nasty chemical stuff to grab the guy. It's the UK, so not all officers carried guns. Nearest armed unit was busy. Finally got this guy handcuffed. Then in the van he tried to take his own life by climbing upside down to bash his skull in. Ended up blue lighting him to the hospital with a serious head injury. The other crazy one was being parked up outside a guy's house who we thought had a gun. While we watched his front door in an unmarked car playing clothes, waiting for armed officers, the guy came out, walked over to us, and effectively handed himself in. He was really nice to us, but it was a weird situation. That was in my last role. My current role is even crazier, but too recent to post now. Story 103. Went to a job where a guy was smashing up a garage and putting his fist through a window to get into a house. There were also reports of a bit of blood. Me and my offsider rock up and there's this guy, bit of blood on him, and a screwdriver in hand. We couldn't properly see the screwdriver, and in the early morning light, it looked like a knife. So my partner calls a knife. I reach for my gun, then the guy quickly says it's a screwdriver and puts it away, hands up. We arrest him for criminal damage and then we ask, what's going on? Well, this guy and a female friend were playing board games all night and drinking, and they end up playing the Firefly board game. He starts acting jerky, and she kicks him out of the house after an argument erupts of dice rolling. He smashes a window, cuts his hand up, smashes the garage door to get his car out, then we arrive, nearly drawing our guns over a freaking board game argument. Story 104. I have many. Midnight shift. Respond to a shooting at a fast food restaurant at about 1 a.m. Turns out a victim was in his car in line behind the suspect's car. Victim honked his horn to let the staff inside know they were waiting for service, as he had been waiting a while. Suspect takes this as a personal attack, exits his car, walks to victim, begins yelling. Victim tells him he has no problem with him and apologizes. Suspect then goes to passenger door and yells at victim's fiancée. Victim gets out and is like, leave her alone. Suspect swings on victim and they begin fighting, only the victim is a middleweight boxer and destroyed this guy, knocks him on his butt, and turns to get back in his car. Suspect, ego bruised and embarrassed, gets up, produces a handgun, and shoots a victim twice in the back of the head. Suspect flees. Now I arrive with another officer and see the victim is standing up, while fiancé screams and a small crowd has gathered. I get close and try to get victim to sit down. EMS is coming. Victim up close looked like a damn zombie. Blood everywhere, front of his face missing, groaning with blood running from where his mouth used to be. He sits down and starts to convulse, then begins grabbing at his head. I hold his wrists to make sure he doesn't tickle his brain, and we held him there while his fiancée, covered head to toe in her soon-to-be husband's blood, screams that awful death wail people only make when someone close to them is dying. EMS arrived and transported him to hospital where he died. Victim and fiancé lived literally across the street from the restaurant and hopped over for a late-night meal. You never know who is around you or what they'll do. That night, a man died because he honked a horn in a drive-thru. Story 105. Not a cop, but this happened yesterday morning. Went out to eat a quick breakfast at McDonald's with my mother-in-law, wife, and 2 kids, ages 2 and 5. We get done putting them in the car, and then we 3 adults went to the back to smoke a cig before leaving. There's a car in the space to the left of us, so it's on the driver's side of our car, which is my mother-in-law's rental. 2 cop cars pull in and one parks in the spaces opposite the lot to us, but is facing us, typing in his computer. It's a bad area, so I figured tag running. That's cool. Then he pulls right behind the car next to us, blocking them in, and cops get out each side, guns drawn, screaming for them to get the hell out of the car now. I'm like, wow, that's extreme for expired tags or something. Then it all goes wrong. The driver puts it in reverse and slams into the cop car. We are behind our car, and my wife and mother-in-law run because, well, it's scary as hell. The car angles itself and rams the front driver's side of our rental and flies into the McDonald's, then backs up after it breaks the McDonald's window trying to ride the curb out, but crashes into a different part of the building and is stuck. I make a mad dash for our rental to get the kids out of the car. I get to the door and a cop grabs me and throws me on the ground while I'm yelling I need to get these kids out in case the driver reverses into our car. He tells me to shut the hell up. Nice. Then I'm cuffed by one of the 100 cops and now on scene, just watching as they surround the car and smash the windows out and drag those 3 people out and push their face into all the glass on the ground now. Finally, we were able to get the kids and I was freed by a higher-ranking cop who told the other cop to let me the hell go because I'm trying to get my kids, and why would he put a kid in harm's way if I was willing to get him? I guess that didn't go down well. 5-year-old is in tears, but my 2-year-old was laughing, so he either went insane or he's just his regular self being a weirdo. We had them checked out and then took them to the hospital. The cops said don't worry about the guys getting out because they have charges that will probably make them do life, and we had no idea the car we parked next to. I guess the car was stolen also. Guess McDonald's was a bad choice. On the plus side, the cops gave my son a Beanie Baby Moose, and the 5-year-old a cool girl's toy, so they were super happy about that and the action ride they got to go on. Story 106. Not really crazy, but the one that stuck with me. Context. My dad had a heart attack when I was 13, and I was so panic-struck at the time that I couldn't do anything but watch. If it weren't for my stepmom calling an ambulance, he likely would have died. I responded to a call in a building in a corporate business district for a man who collapsed at work and is unresponsive. Go inside and see a 50-ish-year-old man on the ground who had turned a whitish blue. About 25 people were surrounding him while one person was attempting to do CPR. I stepped in immediately, no pulse, and began CPR. As I began, I broke his ribs, indicating the guy before me was doing it incorrectly. After 15 minutes of doing CPR, paramedics arrived. This was an excruciatingly long response time for my city. They began hooking up their automatic CPR rig and began medicating. They transported him to the nearest hospital where he passed due to a lack of oxygen to his brain. The entire time I was doing CPR, all I could see was my dad. I was doing what I should have done for him to a complete stranger. I looked at his pale body and saw my dad laying there dying. Every cop deals with the different calls differently, both at the scene and mentally after. This one personally wrecked me. Story 107. This one time I was in LA at some office building that my estranged wife worked at. I was attempting to reconcile with her. I was off duty at the time. They were having a Christmas Eve party and some German terrorists basically took control of the entire skyscraper. They were after money, $640 million in bearer bonds, but tried to make it seem like they were political terrorists. Very sophisticated heist, to say the least. A hostage situation ensued, but I managed to escape and sneak around the building. I took out almost all of these guys, and the head honcho of the operation fell from high up on the tower and died after he and I scuffled. It was the craziest thing that ever happened to me, and I'm a New York City cop. It was on the news, but this was back in 1988, so most people probably wouldn't remember it. Crazy thing is that the whole episode saved my marriage with my wife. Funny how a bad situation works out the best sometimes. Call me skeptical, this sounds like a movie plot. I feel like this might be a reference I'm missing, or maybe OP really did just have a crazy day. Story 108. Not a police officer, but my father works upgrading police computers, so occasionally he accidentally opens a file he didn't mean to, but still reads some if they're eye-catching. The other day, my father opened this file that was about some person who had murdered 7 people in the weirdest ways. Number 1. This guy had been boiled alive in a huge cauldron-looking thing, and then was thrown into the neighbor's backyard in a random bag, where the murderer called the police because, quote, he heard a screaming a few days before, and now smelt like something was rotting, which apparently the moldy body had let off. The neighbor got sent to jail for life, but eventually was released once the murderer was found due to one of the next few people. Number 2. This guy was left in a cage for 2 weeks straight with no food or water, forced to eat his own crap and drink his pee when he died after the 2 weeks, and he had been pulling out his hair in stress and had been chained by the neck to the cage. The murderer dumped him in the water in a creek tied to a car door. There was no one arrested for this crime, as no one had any idea who murdered him, and was an ongoing case. Number 3 and 4. These guys were together throughout the whole rest of their lives, but were complete strangers at first. They both were thrown into a pit full of venomous Australian snakes, illegally owned, and then were left to die. So the guy had kept these guys in the pit for 3 weeks, and then called the police saying he randomly found these guys in a pit with snakes. And his acting, according to the report, was phenomenal, and they believed him. And then a guy that lived nearby to the pit and the guys and the snakes had been arrested, as most fake evidence made by the murderer had been discovered by the police pointing fingers at the closest guy to the incident. The arrested guy was sentenced to life and was released soon. Number 5, 6, and 7. A group of friends that were hitchhiking on a random road in the middle of nowhere. The murderer dragged them out of the car while they were unconscious and tied them up to the wall in his basement. Yeah, this dude had a freaking dungeon-like basement, so this was one I was skeptical about. And the murderer had left them there for a few weeks, feeding them food scraps and giving them water. The murderer had decided to spend those weeks using them as punching bags, and would slice their skin open, then pour salty water on their wounds, and had covered each wound with Glad wrap so they couldn't die as fast. These guys were people the murderer knew and had robbed the murderer once before, so I believe that's why he went so hard on these poor souls. Long story short, they were found dead when a neighbor had called a report, as the neighbor believed he was doing drugs and selling them, so the police searched the house and found the guys. The murderer was arrested, and that was when he fessed up. He also took videos of each person he murdered and of them dying. The unfortunate thing was there was one police officer in particular that had been to all of the deaths and was filing the reports for every single one of those cases. That police officer was the one that owned the computer my dad was upgrading, which was the worst. That police officer was also the one who discovered the basement bodies first, and was the one who also watched the footage of each death alongside the detective as the cases were being filed, and the guy was sentenced to life in prison with no parole. My father became friends with this police officer, once bringing it up to the officer that owned the computer, and now they're best friends. This is some weird story that is not fake. I can barely believe this is true, but the officer backed up my father's story, so I don't know what to think anymore. This happened in a decent-sized country town that has some houses and a splatter in one spot, then nothing, then another splatter of houses, so that's what the town is like. The officer has now quit and is in severe therapy. Hey, OP, I'm pretty sure your dad was committing a horrendous crime reading that, unless it was like public record, I guess. But that's a lot to, accidentally read. Story 109. My dad was a cop, and I'm sure there are better stories he hasn't told me, but I can remember him talking about how he and some coworkers had to drive through an anti-police riot in NYC. They all had helmets in the car, but no one was wearing them. The way my dad tells it, he got a sudden overwhelming feeling he should put his helmet on. He told his coworkers and they shrugged him off, but he put the helmet on and seconds later, a brick comes flying through the windshield and hits my dad in the head. And then all of the coworkers suddenly scrambled to put their helmets on too. Also, I remember a story where a woman called panicking because her baby wouldn't wake up. They get there and they all try to wake the baby up too, but they can't. They get in the car to take him to the hospital and at some point the baby just woke up. Nothing was wrong with him. He was breathing the whole time apparently, just sleeping so deeply no one could wake him. Story 110. Not the cop, but the guy cops were called on to. Try to picture it from the cop's side though. I'm epileptic, and thus am afraid of any and all blinking lights. I take Keppra in anti-epileptic that makes you very, very angry at times, like full Hulk out mode. Google Kep Rage. Second, I got in a fight with a guy who parked and started honking. Now, normally honking wouldn't get me going. The problem, however, is how the guy was honking. The honking is in quotes, because it's not your standard honking. Let's say you're in traffic and there's a moron in front of you. How long do you hold it? A second? 5? Let's go really crazy. 10 seconds. My guy was going for about 40 minutes before I lost my crap. Just one long honk. My coworker described my loss of crap as, you suddenly became very calm, slowly got up from the chair, slowly walked outside, calmly talked to this guy for a bit, and then started trying to yank him from the window and beat the crap out of him. Normally this would result in assault charges. I tried to play my cripple role harder. When I went out, I immediately hit my face in my jacket. Why? The cop car's lights were on. The blinking ones. The guy who I had a fight with proceeded to jump into a garage bin and scream like I'm the ghost of Hitler himself. I explained my condition and to my surprise, one of the cops practically dove into the car to turn the lights off. I wasn't uncooperative, save for not allowing the cops to turn the lights on the roof of the car on, citing epilepsy and chain smoking, citing a massive anxiety about the situation, but the other guy? So much screaming. He acted like an average teenage girl in the presence of a spider. He also tried claiming I brought a massive knife out. I welcomed the cops to check the warehouse for massive kitchen knives. Well, my boss did and then me. To my surprise, they did find what can be constituted as a kitchen knife, though a butter knife. Turns out our entrance security guy likes to bring butter, jam, and bread, and make himself and the guy who deals with delivery guys an occasional treat. Not massive though. After some talking and several cigarettes, the summoning, let's call it, ended with the cops saying that if we shake hands, say our apologies, they won't start any unnecessary paperwork. I shook the guy's hand and apologized. The guy did shake my hand, but after he let go, he started screeching about how it's unfair and how I should rot behind bars. To my delight, he was hauled away. Don't know how his day ended. Story 111. I was training a new girl with only a couple months on. We got a call from the other side of the country saying that their friend called and just kept saying help. We got to the door and knocked and could hear a woman saying, "Help me." Opened the door and there in front of me was a woman in her 50s, on her knees, completely naked and covered in crap. I don't mean she had crapped herself. I mean she was covered in it. In her hair, all over her body. I'm not lying when I say this. It was in her goddamn teeth. There was a trail of crap and pee going down the hall. Found her boyfriend or whatever passed out drunk in the bathroom, and he had no idea any of this had happened. When I went back into the other room, the rookie was helping the crap monster to her feet. I politely told her not to touch the crap monster and wait for the ambulance. The sight of the rookie on her hands and knees rubbing her arms in the grass trying to get the crap off of her is one of my favorite memories. Ice is a hell of a drug. Well, yeah, that's a horrifying, insane thing to find. Shout out to the friend, though. They really wanted to make sure their friend was okay. That being said, it seems like she wasn't 100% okay. If OP is telling the truth and drugs really were involved, I hope she's clean now. Sounds like it was doing a number to her life. Anyway, that's the last story we have for today. Honestly, guys, I don't know what the editors and stuff are going to do with this video because it feels like there are 2 different topics in here. So, we'll just see what happens. If this is indeed, though, the end of one long video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, and I will see you in the next one.